Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 81. Hargan's words caused Yuan's eyebrows to twitch slightly. The Lesser Pontiff of the Heavenly Demon Cult. That's out of nowhere. Yuan checked the title's characteristics. Lesser Pontiff of the Heavenly Demon Cult. A rank just below the pontiff that allowed the player to command players who had joined the Heavenly Demon Cult. The problem was that the Heavenly Demon Cult had almost completely disappeared from the martial world. But, are they coming out now? It was possible. The reason the Heavenly Demon Cult had been hiding in Cheonmasan until now was because of the Heavenly Demon's stubbornness to protect the Divine Flame. Now that their wish had been fulfilled, it wasn't strange for the Heavenly Demon Cult to start moving. And they've chosen the martial arts tournament as their first stage. Yuan recalled the Heavenly Demon's face. He's a sly fox, unlike his appearance. The Heavenly Demon was known as the greatest warrior in the martial world. Unlike Namgung Jinwoon, who had barely missed becoming a high ranker, he was quite high up in the high ranker rankings. He was a great warrior. And at the same time, he was also the mastermind who had created the current Heavenly Demon Cult. It was unclear whether the rumor had started with someone from the Heavenly Demon Cult or if it was the Heavenly Demon's plan. But it wasn't a bad situation. If the Heavenly Demon Cult starts moving, they'll become a great force. The Heavenly Demon Cult was a group that rivaled the strongest in the martial world with just their own sect. Just looking at their background, Yuan had gained a bigger backing than Namgung Hoon. Since it's the first time someone from the Heavenly Demon Cult has come out into the martial world, I don't think they'll be just any ordinary person. Are they a ranker, or a player? If they're a ranker, they wouldn't be able to appear in the intermediate division, so I won't be able to fight them. It seemed that Hargan thought the Lesser Pontiff of the Heavenly Demon Cult would be a ranker. The Lesser Pontiff was the one with the power just below the Pontiff. It was hard to imagine the Heavenly Demon Cult giving such power to a mere player. You passed the Heavenly Demon Cult's test. Do you happen to know anything? It was me. Huh, what, me, the Lesser Pontiff? A face of momentary incomprehension. Hargan's eyes widened as he belatedly understood Yuan's words. You, yeah, the Lesser Pontiff is like the Crown Prince of the Three Greats. Something like that. Hargan's mouth hung open. Hargan's jaw dropped. That's how he managed to raise his stats, level, and skill proficiency, which made the 15th floor's trial that had been blocked off go smoothly. In this way, as his stats, level, and skill proficiency increased, the previously blocked 15th floor test also became easier. Bam, he was confident, this time at the martial arts competition. Even if he didn't win, he definitely had to rank in the top. Even for that reason, I should easily pass the preliminaries. Thud, the stage of the martial arts competition appeared before his eyes. Tens of thousands of martial arts competition players participated in the preliminaries. The method of the preliminaries was simple. 10 players would go up on stage, and the last one standing would advance to the main competition. No one knew who the 10 players would be until the preliminaries began. I wonder who'll be there. Yang Wanyel stepped onto the stage. Wow, he's coming up. Who is he? Hey, isn't that the son of the Seoman Sega? Isn't he the one who just went up to the 10th floor? Yang Wanyel, the idiot of the spear sword faction. Yang Wanyel, where? The stage was huge. It was a giant stadium specially made for the martial arts competition, and above it were seats that could accommodate 100,000 spectators. The stadium was wide enough to accommodate thousands of people. Since this place was originally where rankers competed, it couldn't be small. This place was one of the tower's best architectural feats, made using the technology of the other floors. Yang Wanyul's chest opened wide. There's someone who recognizes me. Idiot wasn't a very nice title, but there was still someone who recognized him. It was probably because he had been active in the world of the 10th floor, the Murim, for quite some time. I'm finally standing on this stage. How much time had passed since he had been running for this day? Yang Wanyul looked around, his tension strung tight. His most important opponent was, of course, the player from the Seoman Sega. I can't ignore the pure-blood descendants of the Seoman Sega, even if they just went up to the 10th floor. I should avoid facing them if possible. Most of the players from the Segas had some level of skill, even if they were on a lower floor. Yang Wanyil recognized Seoman Sega's Seoman Chong in his head and turned his gaze. I don't have any information on the others. Most of them seem to be nobody's huh. Yang Wanyil's eyes caught a familiar face. It was definitely a face he had seen somewhere. It was faint, but it didn't take him long to remember. That guy is the one who, during the time when he was recruiting new players by the order of the sect master of the sword sect. He was the guy who smeared ink all over his face. That bastard. Yang Wanyil's eyes lit up. He had been searching for him, but he finally encountered him at the Muram competition. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow bridge. He had improved his skills and even cleared the floors in the meantime. Not only had his skills improved since then, but he also wouldn't let his guard down this time. It wouldn't be difficult to defeat a guy who had only recently reached the 10th floor. You're dead now. It's Kim Yu-won. A shout came from somewhere. The sound spread like wildfire. Kim Yu-won, what, really? Where, who is it? The audience started to look for Kim Yu-won at the shout of someone who recognized his face. He was the most notable player in this Muram competition. However, Yu-won, who did nothing but climb the tower, wasn't well known. He's here, Kim Yu-won. Yang Wonil also knew a lot about Kim Yu-won through rumors. He had already been rumored to be the strongest player of all time, as he broke new records every time he took a test. This is bad. He was unlucky to be in the same group as him. Even Seo Moon Chong thought he was unlucky, but the worst possible opponent had been assigned to his group. In that case, Yang Wonil glared at his opponent. I'll cut you down, even if it's you. Rather, if he showed good results in this preliminary round, it might lead to better results. The more people remembered him in the preliminaries that included Kim Yu-won, the more he would be remembered by the audience. 10, 9, 8. The numbers floating in the air decreased one by one. Yang Wonil waited for the number to reach 1. Finally, when all the numbers had decreased. 1, swish, clang, he roughly pulled out the sword he had at his waist as he jumped. Do you remember me? Swish. Yang Wonil's sword cut through the air. He thought he had definitely cut him, but his opponent quickly dodged to the side. It was a close call. Yang Wonil moved his feet and continued to attack. I haven't forgotten the humiliation you gave me that day. Flick. Yang Wonil felt a small shock on his chin. It didn't hurt much. It was such a weak impact that it felt like a child's punch. What the heck? There was no problem to be seen. I don't know what hit me in the jaw. Yang Wonil, who was momentarily bewildered, soon decided to ignore it. What hit me? An attack of this level wouldn't hurt me no matter how many times I got hit. But, my feet stopped. No matter how much strength I put into it, it wouldn't move. Thud. The strength in my sword-wielding hand also weakened, and the sword fell to the floor of the stadium. I could see my opponent's face. I don't know why, but I already felt wronged. It's over as soon as it starts. I'm Yang. Just as I was about to shout, I was Yang Wonil. Thud. Yang Wonil's body collapsed powerlessly. So who are you? Yu-won suddenly ran in and looked at Yang Wonil, who had been hit once and collapsed, with a bewildered expression. From what I heard, it seemed like I had been humiliated, but no matter how hard I tried to remember, I couldn't remember meeting such a guy during the exam. Is he already passed out? I didn't hit him that hard, but he's a weak guy. Yu-won turned his attention away from Yang Wonil, who was drooling on the floor and unconscious. There are now 8 players left. Yang Wonil's surprise attack had already focused attention on Yu-won. What did you just do? I didn't even see it. That guy is Kim Yu-won. Are you sure? I've heard the rumors. Black eyes and hair, and the clothes of a shaman. It's the same as the guy the first no. Then it must be him. The players assigned to the same group were all wary of Yu-won. Of course. Anyway, only one player can advance to the main tournament. Unless Yu-won is defeated here, it will be impossible to advance to the main tournament of the Muram competition. It seems like you've all noticed. Yu-won, who had been trying to take the preliminaries a little easy, slowly drew his sword and looked around at the 8 players. Come at me one at a time, or all at once. Screech. The sword was drawn, making an old, worn-out sound. Yu-won didn't bother to avoid the gazes that were fixed on him. A tense tension filled the stadium. Let's hurry up and finish this. Chapter 82. Thwack. Mana gushed forward as he swung his sword. It wasn't a special skill, just a simple technique using mana. A type of sword pressure. Arg. What skill is this? A few bodies flew away, and some who were a bit more skilled hurriedly used skills to defend themselves. However, their formation had already crumbled from that one attack just now. Thud. Yuan charged toward the numerous players. He's coming. No, he's already here. He's on the right. No, he's on the left. Which side is he on? Damn it. The players who seemed to have promised to work together to fight together. However, the results weren't very good. Crash. Cuck. His heart was pierced by the tip of the sword, and his body flew away with a heavy shock. Thud. The player who was sent flying a few meters up in the air soon crashed to the ground. After a moment, the players around him shouted again. He's here. It's not a sword. Then what is it? I don't know. It feels like some kind of blunt weapon. Isn't it the back of the sword? It was chaos. There weren't many people who could keep their eyes on Yuan's movements. Xiao Moonchong was barely able to see the faint afterimages. He's here. The tip of the sword moved slowly. He could see it clearly. However, he couldn't react. Schwaik. A beat slower than he thought. No, the sword approached his nose a few beats faster. I'm going to die. Tick. The tip of the sword touched his nose. It was a light shock. As if an adult was scolding a child. Crash. Cuck. Xiao Moonchong flew away from the kick and rolled on the ground. He almost threw up everything in his stomach, but he barely managed to hold it in. Gulp. Cough. He coughed up the blood in his mouth. Xiao Moonchong gritted his teeth at the pain in his chest. How many ribs did I break? It was impossible to fight any longer with this body. Of course, even if he could fight, he didn't have the will to. He wouldn't fight unless there was a decent fight, and the gap was so big that he didn't feel like it. Players who had been hit by Yuan were groaning all around him. About half were unconscious, and the other half were injured and collapsed. There didn't seem to be any dead people. Did they all survive? Are you done? Yang Wan-il, who had collapsed during the game, approached vigorously as if nothing had happened. A game where you fight with weapons. It is natural for someone to die there. But no one died. It couldn't be a coincidence. Are they watching? Just a thought. Even so, they were confident in their abilities to some extent if they participated in the Muram competition. Furthermore, they were dealing with 8 people, not 1 or 2, and they were at ease. But that was only for a moment. Come to think of it, just now. Surely, Yuan's sword could have struck his head. I thought I was going to die like this, but what flew was not a sword but a foot. So I thought the sword was a bluff and the real thing was the foot. But the connection of the movement was too unnatural to think that way. Ha, ha ha ha, a vain laughter came out. No matter how much it was a preliminary, in that Muram competition, Yuan was acting like an adult dealing with a child. After the game, Yuan waited for Hargan's match. Hargan's match was the next one. The winner, Hargan. Wow, what the hell is this guy? He took care of the rest by himself. There was another guy like Kim Yuan. Clap, clap. The aftermath of Hargan's electric shock still remained in the stadium. The power of the electric shock spread widely. Neither his physical abilities nor his mana were at the level of a low-level player. He really leveled up. Even Yuan was surprised. He seemed to know why Hargan's ranking continued to rise every time he went up a level. His growth rate was ridiculous. I heard that he had just broken through the 25th floor, but his skills were no different from those of the players in the upper floors. Rather, his potential is higher. The electric shock that Hargan possessed. His mana resembled Zeus the most. His talent, skills, and even appearance in handling electric shock. He was a perfect copy of Zeus. It'll be worth watching when he becomes a ranker. It was worth the wait. Yuan got up from his seat. There was no need to watch the rest of the game, as he came out of the exit on the first floor. That's him, a voice that I felt like I had heard somewhere before, but also didn't. Yuan looked at the man pointing at him. The face was the same. I felt like I had seen it somewhere. Ah, I remembered. Who was it? I remembered, but I didn't know the name. His face turned red as if he thought he was being ignored. It's Yang Wan-il. Yang Wan-il, who had fainted during the match, approached while growling. No, he tried to approach. Wait, a man grabbed his shoulder from behind. Yuan had a bad feeling when he saw him. Is he a ranker? His strength was on a different level from Yang Wan-il's. His physique, close to 2 meters tall and covered in muscles, looked strong at a glance. I apologize. My disciple was rude. Who are you? I am Moon So-baek, the master of the Chong Chek. Master. Somehow, he didn't think he was an ordinary player. If he was leading a faction in Muram, he he was at least a ranker. And that master came out himself. In this case, there was only one thing to do. I'm not interested, without even hearing what I have to say. An invitation to join, right? Chongchek Master Moon Sobek looked slightly taken aback. But that was only for a moment, and he soon returned to his original relaxed expression. It seemed that he had already considered this situation to some extent. That's right, I heard that you refused all the invitations from the large guilds. Yes, strictly speaking, Chongchek is not a guild. It's part of the Muram Guild, but it's more like a faction than a guild. It was a funny argument. It was essentially the same as joining a guild, as he was not taking any separate tests to enter the faction. They were asking him to join their group. You may not know this, but Chongchek has a very long history. It's somewhat weakened now, but Chongchek is the first faction to succeed the orthodoxy of Muram. A loud speech. If you join, you will be able to inherit everything from Chongchek. I realized at the moment I saw you in the arena. The future of Chongchek. Please lead it well, then I'll be going. Yu-won had no intention of listening further and walked past Moon Sobek. Moon Sobek, who didn't expect him to pass by so cleanly, looked taken aback for a moment. He thought he would refuse, but he didn't expect it to be so clean-cut. He thought that he would at least go somewhere and have a drink or chat for a while before leaving. Wait a minute, clank, Moon Sobek's hand grabbed Yu-won's shoulder. Yu-won looked at Moon Sobek's face. Unlike before, the gentle expression was gone. When the smile disappeared, Moon Sobek's original face was revealed. As the laughter disappeared, Moon Sobek's original face was revealed. The more he exerted his strength, the more the penalty began to kick in little by little. I guess you didn't understand what I said. What do you mean I didn't understand? This isn't a suggestion, clang, the strength that entered his hand. Do you understand? Wu-won looked at Moon Sobek's hand, which was holding his shoulder. He had thought that this kind of dispute would happen at some point. And when that happened, he was prepared to clash with him. I'm sure you know what happens when a ranker touches a participant in the Muram competition. Wu-won's tone of voice changed. Moon Sobek's lips curled up at the sudden change in atmosphere. Of course I know, you're not afraid of the Namgung Sega. The Muram competition was a tournament hosted by the Namgung Sega, which had the Muram Lord. It was the Namgung Sega's job to clean up the incidents that occurred during the tournament, and touching a participant in the tournament was tantamount to challenging the Namgung Sega. Although the head of the Changjiamun, Moon Sobek, was a ranker, the Changjiamun was only a weak sect compared to the Namgung Sega. On the other hand, the Namgung Sega had more than 10 rankers and Namgung Jinwoon, who was close to being a high ranker. Is that what you believed? The Namgung Sega? Moon Sobek burst out laughing. The head of the Jegal Sega is my sworn brother. Why would I be afraid of the Namgung Sega? He must have had a backer, wondering what he was relying on to come out like this. Does that sworn brother of yours know that his brother is such a bastard? Of course. Moon Sobek put on a proud expression. Don't be so picky, I also want to maintain a good relationship with you. If you listen slowly, you will realize that our Changjiamun is not such a bad place. I refuse. Clang. Wu-won grabbed Moon Sobek's wrist. He exerted his strength and removed the hand that was holding his shoulder. Moon Sobek's eyebrows twitched at the strength he felt from Wu-won's hand. This bastard. He knew that he was very skilled for a player in the lower floors. But this level of strength. He's not to be trifled with. Tisk, tisk. Moon Sobek exerted strength in his arm. As he applied more strength, the penalty gradually began. However, little by little, very slowly, his hand moved. Yuan's hand was pushing his hand away. Do you trust Namgung Se? Kwa-ang. The pain gradually spread to his wrist from the force in his grip. No, Moon Subok had an expression of disbelief. No matter how much he cared about the penalty, he was being pushed back in strength. I only trust myself. TCH. Ta-ak. Moon Subok hurriedly shook off Yuan's hand. He could just ignore the penalty and use his strength, but he didn't even have the time to think about that. Namgung Se was behind him, so he didn't have to worry about the aftermath, and he thought that he could just overpower him with force. You're quite skilled. It seemed that it wouldn't be that easy after all. Chong. Moon Subok pulled out his sword. A blue blade that matched the name of the Kangjonman Blue Sword Clan. He quickly turned his head and checked to see if there was anyone around. The martial arts competition is still going on. It would probably take some time for people to come out. It was a good thing that I told the others to watch over the place, just in case. If Yuan didn't listen, he was prepared to use force. Once he took him to the Blue Sword clan, he would be able to make him move as he wished, no matter what. I won't drag this out, and I'll do it in one go. Come to think of it, there was one. What? A place I trust. Yuan's gaze turned to behind Moon Subok. WK. He could sense a presence. He was sure that he hadn't been able to sense it until quite a distance away, but suddenly the distance had closed. Moon Subok had a strange feeling, as if a ferocious beast was approaching him from behind. I thought it was taking too long anyway. Moon Subok turned his head. The person who had approached was a large man. His clothes and speech were clearly those of a martial artist, but it was a face he had never seen before. He looked between Yuan and Moon Subok and asked, "What are you doing here?" Quan Qianju, Peng Bek Rim. He had fought alongside Yuan in the Heavenly Demon Cult's test, and he greeted them with a polite voice. Young Lord. Chapter 83. Moon Sobek doubted his own ears at Peng Bek Lim's words. Cult leader. It was an unfamiliar word. He wondered if he had misheard the word cult leader. No, before that, Kim Yuan clearly said that he didn't belong to any faction. Moon Sobek's eyes widened. Surely not. In the current Murim, there was only one place that would use the term, cult leader. It wasn't a faction, but rather a religious group. Those who resided in the Heavenly Mountain, a group that could call themselves the true number one under the heavens. The Heavenly Demon Cult. Rumors had spread like wildfire that the Heavenly Demon Cult's cult leader would participate in this Murim competition. And Yuan was the only player to pass the Heavenly Demon Cult's test. Even so, just because he passed a test, he became the cult leader. His head became complicated, but even if he thought it was impossible, he couldn't help but believe it given the situation in front of him. Gulping, Moon Sobek lowered his sword. Peng Bek Lim glared at him and approached Yuan. He observed the atmosphere and clenched his fists. Are we fighting? It hasn't started yet. Yuan's voice naturally lowered. Peng Bek Lim was the same. Unlike before, he was now speaking to Yuan in a more respectful manner. It was simply because it was the Heavenly Demon Cult's rule. What should we do? Peng Bek Lim looked back at Moon Sobek. Should we kill him here? It was as if he was asking for an order. At the same time, an electric current ran through Peng Bek Lim's body, and a fearsome aura radiated out. Moon Sobek instantly felt like Peng Bek Lim was a giant several times his size. A rancor. And not just any rancor. His abilities surpassed most rancors in Murim. Moon Sobek considered fighting Peng Bek Lim. I'll most likely lose. No, even if I win, there will be a problem. His opponent was a rancor from the Heavenly Demon Cult. If he won this fight, he would end up making enemies with them. In the end, there was only one decision he could make. Ahem. I'm sorry. Moon Sobek cleared his throat and put his sword back in its sheath. I didn't know you were the cult leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult. If I had known that you were from a faction, I wouldn't have approached you. We're not a faction. Don't treat us like one. Anyway. Moon Sobek turned around in a hurry and walked away with cold sweat on his forehead. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll be going now. Yuan watched Moon Sobek leave as if he was running away. Peng Bek Lim glared at him as if he didn't like it. Are you just going to let him go? We don't know what kind of person he is. And the important one isn't that guy. Then who is important? Jegal Sega must have someone backing that guy up. Jegal Sega. Peng Bek Lim's lips curled up. Even if it wasn't, I have a dinner appointment with Namgung Sega after the Murim competition, so I'll talk to him then. If there's any suspicious activity, we need to punish them for sure. A dinner appointment? With Namgung Sega? Will the cult leader also be attending? Namgung Sega was recognized as the #1 clan under the heavens while the Heavenly Demon Cult remained in the Heavenly Mountain. Namgung Sega was recognized as the best martial arts school in the world while the Heavenly Demon Cult did not leave Cheonmasan. Unlike the previous cult leader, he is not a true warrior. Since there is a system, numbers are important. I didn't know that the Heavenly Demon Cult, who just started their activities, would make contact with Namgung Sega this quickly. Did you spread the rumor? What rumor are you talking about? That the sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult is participating in the Murim competition. If that's the case. Peng Bakrim's expression turned sinister. It seems like the believers who recently returned to Murim are making a fuss. They really like to talk. Was he always like this? He's always like this except when he's fighting. Ha ha ha. Judging from his hearty laughter, it seemed like it was definitely Peng Bakrim. Yuan sighed and shook his head. Heavenly Demon Cult, a title that was forced upon him. He ended up gaining more power than he expected. Yuan thought about the ripple effects that the Heavenly Demon Cult's actions would bring. I'll have dinner with you. It was probably just a friendly gathering. If he went to such a place, he would only get goosebumps. Instead, but be sure to take care of the Lord of the Spear Sword School and his sworn brother. Peng Bakrim bowed his head at Yuan's command. I will do as you say. Go. Yes. Yuan walked ahead. Peng Bakrim followed him. Heavenly Demon Cult. The best group in Murim. Yuan decided to use their sword to his advantage. A tall, 5-story building located next to the stadium. Cheon Mujin was waiting for Yuan in the most expensive accommodation nearby, where one could see the breathtaking view of the huge stadium outside the window. You must be tired. Why are you suddenly saying that? Didn't you just finish the preliminary round? Did you come to watch? No, you're going to win anyway, so there's no need for me to watch. Cheon Mujin said so and poured tea himself. Isn't that right? Yuan picked up the teacup. At the same time, the weight of the tea that Cheon Mujin was pouring felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. Cheon Mujin's mana was poured into the tea like a waterfall. A test. It was a light but difficult test. Yuan answered while holding the mana in his teacup. Maybe. Sweat dripped from Yuan's forehead along with his ambiguous answer. It was as if a waterfall was gathering at one point and falling. Crack. A crack appeared on the teacup. I can't let it break. The moment he thought that. Drip, drip, mana started to leak out of the teacup. Thanks to that, it was stable for a while. Crash. It felt as if a huge darkness was swallowing his body. That moment, thud, the last drop of tea fell onto the teacup. The teacup almost broke. You're strong. If someone had seen the two of them, they would have just thought that he was just pouring tea. However, Yuan felt that the tea he had received in this short amount of time was more difficult than any fight he had ever had in his life. Why did you participate in something like the Murim competition? It doesn't seem like you have the skills to be involved in a fight between kids. I need the prize. You mean the great return pill? Yes. Yuan looked at the cracked teacup. I'm still one step away. His magic power stat had reached 99. What if it had reached 100? Not only would it not have been difficult to receive the tea like this, but the teacup wouldn't have broken either. Don't be obsessed with numbers. I want to say that, but I can't. Unlike the previous leader, I'm not a true warrior. Since it has a system, numbers are important. I understand. Is that why you need the Great Wandan? I'm not sure if it will work if I take it, but there's a good chance it will. Yuan had to overcome that hurdle as quickly as possible. That was the first condition Yuan had set for himself. The Great Wandan is definitely a good elixir. The fact that the Murim competition was able to grow this big is thanks to that product. Cheon Mujin nodded as if he finally understood and began to drink the tea he had just poured. Yuan, who was thirsty from using his strength, also picked up his cracked teacup. Yuan took a sip and asked. Then why are you here, leader? I heard that the heavenly demon cult doesn't come down from the heavenly mountain. It's about time we started to get active. Active? In what way? Accepting new followers, taking exams, expanding our influence and securing our position. Things like that. What about the heavenly mountain? I'll have to go back and forth often. Technology has improved these days, so it's quite easy to get there and back. Cheon Mujin had made up his mind to enter Murim. It was something that could instantly turn Murim's hierarchy and landscape upside down. Because Cheon Mujin was the heavenly demon cult itself. Will it be okay? What? I said it before, but I'm not fit to be a sub-leader. I don't have any intention of settling down. I know, I won't fulfill my duties, but I'll enjoy the benefits. Naturally, the followers will resent me. I am the sky of the heavenly demon cult. As long as I acknowledge you, no one will be able to go against your will. Cheon Mujin's voice was not forceful. His languid voice sounded like he was stating something as obvious as the sun rising in the morning. Because to Cheon Mujin, it was that obvious. I could ruin the heavenly demon cult. But that wasn't all that Yuan was worried about. I am an enemy of Olympus. Olympus. Yes, Yuan talked about his relationship with Olympus. From saving Hephaestus to fighting against Olympus rankers. Cheon Mujin nodded as he listened to the story. I see. Gigantomachia. Having been confined to the heavenly mountain for so long, he had not experienced gigantomachia. However, the incident was too famous for him not to know about it. Are you trying to stop it? Something like that. In the end, you're going to fight. Cheon Mujin's expression remained the same. He was not fazed by the prospect of having to fight a formidable enemy like Olympus. Are you okay with that? Should I not set sail because I'm afraid of the typhoon? I have no choice but to go. Yuan welcomed it, but he still couldn't understand it. Strictly speaking, he was an outsider. Even though he was family that was born and raised in the heavenly mountain, Cheon Mujin was too easily trying to walk a path that he couldn't walk with him. Together with the heavenly demon cult. If you don't understand, remember this. Nothing else matters. There is only one thing that you, the sub-leader, must keep in mind from now on. Cheon Mujin had called Yuan today to tell him this. From now on, you are the heavenly demon cult. As the preliminaries of the Murim competition were coming to an end. It was late at night, and a banquet had begun in the Murim Alliance. This year's Murim competition is also a great success. The response is hotter than ever. This year's Murim competition is also very popular. The response is hotter than ever before. There are so many excellent prospects. From the Prince of Olympus to the descendants of Asgard, the angels of heaven, and theirs. Kim Yu-won too. Most of the stories shared while drinking were about the Murim competition. The members of the Murim Alliance gathered in the banquet hall talked while celebrating the safe conclusion of the preliminary round. The great adults of Murim. In addition, most of the Murim Alliance's rankers were gathered in one place. He really is amazing. Now I finally understand why they keep mentioning Kim Yu-won, Kim Yu-won. That's right. I heard he doesn't belong anywhere. If only we could bring him to our Shinmu school. Come to think of it, which school's test did he pass to get here? You don't know. Maybe he's the young leader of the heavenly demon cult. A sharp voice came from somewhere. There was a man sitting alone in the corner of the crowd, drinking. The Lord of the Heavenly Sword School. Long time no see, but just now. Young leader, what does that mean? The story of Yu-won passing the heavenly demon cult's test was already widely known. However, simply passing the test and becoming the young leader of the heavenly demon cult were completely different matters. The young leader was the successor to the heavenly demon, and was like the head of a family. It was hard to believe that someone who had only passed one test would be given the position of young leader. I saw it clearly, the rankers of the heavenly demon cult who called him young leader. Did something happen in the meantime? It was the question they had been waiting for. Moon Sobek paused for a moment. It wasn't just because of the alcohol. Moon Sobek took another sip of his drink and opened his mouth. I was going to greet him because I was happy to see such an excellent prospect, but they immediately drew their swords, saying that I shouldn't approach their young leader. Phew, how could they? Is it so hard to just say hello? Voices of indignation erupted. The atmosphere gradually grew heavy. Moon Sobek listened to the voices around him. That's how all the cults are. Wasn't it the same in the old days? The Murim Alliance and the cults are destined to be at odds. That's right. What do you expect from those guys? I don't know much about it, but did the heavenly demon cult do something? It's been a long time since then, so it's not like that now, but they've been. Public opinion about the heavenly demon cult wasn't very good. To those who had been holding the power of Murim for a long time, the existence of the heavenly demon cult was a burden. Moreover, the adults who had lived in Murim for a long time didn't hesitate to call the heavenly demon cult a demonic cult. He had a hard time keeping the corners of his mouth from turning up. Moon Sobek spoke with as solemn an expression and voice as possible. As you know, Kim Yu-won is the strongest candidate to win this Murim competition. Phew, how can a young leader of a demonic cult? Exclamations erupted here and there. The Marine's resentment towards the heavenly demon cult hadn't completely disappeared yet. How about this? What do you mean? Do you have a plan? Some of the Murim rankers listened to Moon Sobek's words. Moon Sobek, who had become the center of attention, suppressed his excitement and carefully opened his mouth. In the main tournament, Chapter 84. 2 days were given after the preliminaries of the martial arts competition ended and before the main competition began. And after the preliminaries ended, the players of the Murim Alliance had a meeting like the adults' banquet. Have you heard the news? What news? Of course you've heard it. It's news that was delivered to all the players who advanced to the main competition. They sat on a table by the lake, sharing food and chatting. Over 100 players, or rather the promising talents of Murim, were gathered in one place. All of them had passed the preliminary round of the martial arts competition. The rules of the main competition suddenly changed. Has there ever been a time like this? A message was sent to the players who passed the preliminary round. It was about the suddenly changed rules of the main competition and the way the winner would be decided. It's not common. Still, since the elders decided it by majority vote, there must be some deep thought behind it. Is that so? No, that's not it. The promising talent who first spoke shook his head. There's a rumor that the sub-sect master of the heavenly demon cult is participating in this competition. Ah, if that's the case. I've heard about it too. There's a story that Kim Yu-won is the sub-sect master of the heavenly demon cult. Is that true? I don't know. Still, he's the only one who passed the test of the heavenly demon cult, so maybe. Hey, even so, how could he be a sub-sect master? But the timing is just right. He only came down from the heavenly mountain after the first person passed the test. Well, once one topic was thrown out, the promising talents, who were thirsty for gossip, began to talk about Yu-won and the heavenly demon cult. Then is the winner of this competition going to be someone from the heavenly demon cult? What a grand return. He must have been waiting for this moment. Then, for that, the sub-sect master position to Kim Yu-won. Such a cowardly act. They were all players who belonged to Murim. In addition, the martial arts competition was a source of pride and a great festival for the players who belonged to Murim. And the heavenly demon cult was the only group in the 10th floor world that did not belong to Murim. There was no one in this place who would be happy if the winner of the martial arts competition came from such a place. So what are we going to do about it? A sharp voice cut through the crowd. People's gazes turned to the owner of the voice. Nam Dong-hoon, who was drinking with a few people, turned his head. Did the heavenly demon cult break the rules? Or did they use cowardly methods outside the arena? No one answered. Of course, what Yu-won, the sub-sect master of the heavenly demon cult, showed was overwhelming strength, not particularly cowardly methods. They would have nothing to say. Nam Dong-hoon, who waited for an answer to his question while looking around the crowd, clicked his tongue and opened his mouth again. That's not it. It's just that we can't unconditionally reject someone just because they're from outside Murim. That's what's right and chivalrous. If you don't like it, then leave, Nam Dong-hoon. Nam Dong-hoon turned his head at the familiar voice. The player from the Jegal-se family, who first mentioned the heavenly demon cult and was rising as a new star of Murim along with him. Jegal Jin-cheon, didn't you hear me? If you're scared, then leave. A handsome appearance with thin and long eyes like a snake. The more he looked at him, the more he felt strangely uncomfortable. Nam Dong-hoon didn't avoid Jegal Jin-cheon's gaze. They hadn't been on good terms since they were young, but the distance between them grew even further as they grew older. The two of them were now almost like sworn enemies. What do you mean leave? To Nam Dong-hoon's question, Jegal Jin-cheon looked around instead of answering. Quite a few promising talents had already gathered around him. Nam Dong-hoon could roughly guess the situation. Have they already joined forces? It seemed that some kind of story had been going around centered around Jegal Jin-cheon, even before the after-party of the preliminary round began. His current position must be to further increase the number of people who would join him. The target is probably Kim Yu-won. It was an old habit of the Murim to not allow a winner from the Cheonma Divine Church to emerge from the Murim competition. Perhaps this habit wasn't just among the later disciples. The adults changed the rules, and the kids worked together to stop the young leader of the Cheonma Divine Church. Is that the plan? Jegal Jincheon would probably be at the center of this. They were going this far just to catch a single player. The fact that the rules of the Murim competition had changed meant that about half of the Murim guilds were thinking the same thing. But, do as you please. Nam Dong-hoon wasn't worried about what they were planning or scheming. This Murim competition already had a winner before it even started. Then there's no need to bother with it. Nam Dong-hoon, who didn't feel the need to deal with them any further, began to pour more alcohol into his cup. It'll all break apart anyway. The main event of the Murim competition was postponed by a day. Naturally, this caused some complaints. What kind of competition is this? Do you think we have time to spare to come all the way here? The Murim has gone downhill. I'm going back. On the other hand, there were also positive reactions. I don't mind. It seems like the Murim is trying to change. Changing the way the Murim competition is run like this. It might be more fun. Melee, it's different. The method before the main event was a melee. It was a method where all the players who made it to the main event fought in the arena at once, instead of fighting one-on-one. Even in the preliminary rounds, 10 players fought at once. However, considering the size of the arena, even 10 people wasn't that big of a number. Rather, their melee felt pathetic compared to the size of the huge arena. After that, the main event, which had been a one-on-one match, was changed by the Murim to a melee where a large number of players fought at once. But it ends early, so that's good. On the morning of the day the competition began, Harkin immediately visited Yuan's room. Seeing Harkin lying on the floor, munching on jerky with his mouth full, Yuan asked in disbelief. Where did your teammates go? Why are you here? They went out to play. To eat and see things. They were so excited because it's the last day. Aren't they participating in the main event? Huh, they won't be able to win anyway, so they didn't even participate. They're smart. Harkin's teammates knew Yuan, unlike the others. And they were the ones who had watched Harkin the closest. Of course, they would give up on winning early on. Besides, as members of Harkin's team, they were part of Olympus, so they didn't need the sponsorship of a large guild. It's almost time. Harkin, who had been rolling around in Yuan's room, checked the time on his player kit and jumped up from his seat. Let's go quickly. His face was somewhat excited. He wasn't showing it much, but Yuan noticed that he had been glancing at him from time to time. At the same time, there was a fighting spirit mixed in his gaze that he couldn't hide. Is it time for us to fight again? Yuan looked at Harkin as they walked to the arena together. Even though he hadn't watched much of the preliminaries, Yuan didn't think much of the other players' skills. There were a few guys he had heard of in the future who would become rankers, but most of them were just average. Nam Dong-hoon was the only one worth watching. But Harkin was definitely a force to be reckoned with, even among them. Harkin didn't say anything as he headed to the arena. It was strange, considering how talkative he usually was. However, Yuan didn't find Harkin's reaction strange. Harkin was slowly spreading his wings. There are a lot of people. Harkin stuck his tongue out at the crowd that had gathered at the arena. The stadium was packed, and a huge screen was set up outside. It must have been made so that spectators who couldn't enter the stadium could watch the game. Not only on the screen, but the main competition will also be broadcasted simultaneously on the player broadcast. You shouldn't be this surprised. The person who came up to him and said so was Nam Dong-hoon. A face he saw after a few months. Nam Dong-hoon approached Woo-won and held out his hand. Long time no see. Do you remember me? It's not a face that's easy to forget. I'm Nam Dong-hoon. I know, but I'm Kim Woo-won. Harkin made a curious expression at Woo-won and Nam Dong-hoon's greeting. What? You know this guy? Nam Dong-hoon of the Namdong Saga was quite famous among players. The Murim Festival, starting with this Murim Grand Competition, was hosted by the Murim Alliance, which was led by the Namdong Saga Lord. Woo-won nodded and replied. I took the test with him once. But he was an enemy. Harkin looked at him with a curious expression as Nam Dong-hoon explained. You're alive and well. It meant that he should have died if he had met as an enemy. It could have been rude at first glance, but Nam Dong-hoon didn't take it that way. It was the right thing to say. Perhaps if Woo-won had fought properly, Nam Dong-hoon would not have been here by now, as Harkin had said. I'm Harkin, as you know, the great successor of Olympus. There are more than one or two people who call themselves the successor. Harkin's proud introduction was met with a cold shower. It was embarrassing, but Harkin burst out laughing and said. My family is a bit of a mess. It was half a joke and half a joke. Even though he shouldn't laugh, Nam Dong-hoon struggled to keep his laughter from escaping. For a moment, participants in the main competition, please enter the stadium right now. Nam Dong-hoon stopped laughing at the announcement that could be heard outside the stadium. It's nice to see you, but I guess we don't have time to talk for long. Did you have anything to say? I'm not worried, but I think I should tell you. What? Just in case, be careful. Nam Dong-hoon left those ambiguous words and turned around to enter the stadium first. What the hell is this? Harkin, who was full of curiosity, kept asking Woo-won about what Nam Dong-hoon had said. Woo-won was just as curious. But he didn't think deeply about it. Anyway, I'll find out when I get to the stadium. Let's go for now. Clack, clack, the two headed straight to the stadium. A large stage. On top of it, countless participants gathered. There are a lot. There must have been thousands of them. The stadium, which had felt empty when only 10 people were standing, now felt cramped. Above all, the players here are all participants in the main competition. They are skilled players who have made it to the main competition through a competition rate of 10-1. With more than 1,000 of them gathered together, it was truly a magnificent sight. And so it was when I stood on the stage. Swoosh, swoosh. Little by little, strange signs began to appear. There was no need to be loud. The sign was just a, look. Just in case, be careful. Woo-won seemed to know right away what Nam Dong-hoon was worried about. Is that it? The corners of his mouth curled up a little. It was a gaze that he would have passed over without much thought if it hadn't been for Nam Dong-hoon's words and the sudden change in the rules. However, once he became aware of the gaze, it was not difficult to see the speculation in their eyes. More than 100 Murim players. In other words, the players belonging to the Murim Guild were showing hostility towards Woo-won. Chapter 85. It's finally starting. Haha, it's spectacular. So many young people have gathered in one place to compete. This martial arts competition will be talked about for a long time. Why don't we just change the rules of the martial arts competition to this? That's a great idea. The spectator seats of the stadium, or rather, a room where only specially invited spectators could stay. From there, one could see the stadium at a glance. It was a place where only the rankers of the martial arts world who organized the competition could enter. The head of the Jegal family has done a great job. That's right, we almost handed over the glory of the martial arts competition to some deputy leader of the demonic cult. Is that all? Thanks to him, how much more interest has the martial arts competition garnered this time? Haha, what a great fortune for the martial arts world. Namgung Jin-woon struggled to hold back the urge to tear out his ears. Snake-like eyes and wrinkled wrinkles. Jegal Kyung, the head of the Jegal Sega family and also the commander-in-chief of the martial arts world, was smiling at the constant stream of compliments. Haha, what have I done? This is all thanks to the promise made by the Lord of the Spear Sword sect. Oh, right, that's right, yes, the contribution of the Lord of the Spear Sword sect is very great. I'd like to visit my Spear Sword sect after the game. You're always welcome. Ha-het. Moon So-baek, the Lord of the Spear Sword sect, was a figure who had recently had a close relationship with the Jegal Sega family. Namgung Jin-woon closed his eyes as he listened to their words. Rotten. It's rotten. He had known for a long time that the martial arts world was gradually becoming corrupt. Every now and then, when it came to light, there were more than a few times when he felt inadequate. And at the center of it all was always Jegal Kyung, the head of the Jegal Sega family. The second in command of the martial arts world, he had somehow gathered a greater force than the Namgung Sega family. Only then did Namgung Jin-woon realize. The martial arts world of today had become a world where one had to wield words, not swords. However, the reason the martial arts world has become like this is because I am lacking. Namgung Jin-woon decided to make this martial arts competition a turning point for the martial arts world. Creak. The door opened. Surely all the invited martial arts rankers would have arrived, but a new guest had arrived in the room. Who is it? Is there anyone else coming? I think everyone's here. The room overlooking the stadium was the exclusive space for the Martial Arts Guild, the organizers of the martial arts competition. Naturally, no one but the people of the martial arts world could enter. The martial arts rankers in the room looked at the man who had just opened the door and entered. A large height of over 7 feet, a broad and solid-looking upper body, and a red robe. It was not a very common appearance. In particular, the red robe was so noticeable that people did not prefer it very much. The man looked around the room and asked, "Am I too late?" "No, you came just in time." The gazes of the audience turned to where the answer came from. Namgung Jin-woon, who had been sitting in his seat with a sullen face, got up from his seat. Jegal Kyung glared at Namgung Jin-woon with narrowed eyes. What is he up to? Namgung Jin-woon was the one who created the current Namgung family. He was never an easy person to read. Moreover, the person who had just arrived was a guest that Namgung Jin-woon had secretly invited. Who are you? By the looks of it, it seems like you're from the Murim world. The Murim rankers looked the man up and down. He was definitely not an ordinary person. He looked to be in his 40s, but if he was a ranker, it was impossible to guess his age just by his appearance. If he was a somewhat well-known ranker, there should have been 1 or 2 people here who knew his name or face. However, no one here recognized the man. That meant he was an unknown person. At most, he's probably an expert from a remote sect. What's the point of inviting someone like that? You've made a mistake, Lord of the Namgung family. The rankers who had gathered around Jegal Kyung naturally did not feel much threat. It was obvious. The balance of power in Murim had already tipped. Jegal Kyung looked at Namgung Jin-woon and smiled like a snake. Now is the era of words, not swords. As the saying goes, the pen is mightier than the sword. More than half of Murim was already on Jegal Kyung's side. I'm late with the introductions. The man looked around the room and introduced himself with a gentle smile. I'm Cheon Mujin, who came here at the invitation of the Lord of the Namgung family. Cheon Mujin. Wait, don't tell me. Cheon Ma. Eyes widened. In an instant, the air in the room turned cold. Some of the rankers reached for the swords at their waists. You'll die if you draw that. Cheon Mujin's gaze turned to Moon So-baek. Before he knew it, he was gripping the handle of his sword. I promise. Gulping. His throat burned as he swallowed his dry saliva. His spine tingled and the air felt so heavy that his chest felt suffocated. Moon So-baek lowered the hand he had raised to his sword. A smile spread across Cheon Mujin's lips. Good thinking. Clack, clack. Cheon Mujin walked across the room. Cheon Mujin, who had walked to the window overlooking the stadium, opened his mouth again. I heard that the cult leader of the Cheonma cult almost won. That could have been a big disaster. Cheon Mujin's words were full of meaning. Eyes instinctively avoided his gaze. Jegel Kyung began to prepare to attack at any moment. He didn't know why Namgung Jinwoon had called Cheon Mujin here, but Cheon Mujin couldn't have stayed still after hearing such a story. Why, though, however, do I look angry? Cheon Mujin was not angry, but rather wore a faint smile. Cheon Mujin showed a gentle smile, far from getting angry. At the same time, Yu Won's gently curved sword blocked the spear that was striking down from above. Haha, you're mistaken, why would I be angry? Because. Cheon Mujin's gaze turned to the bottom of the stadium, and Yu Won's figure came into view. The board you guys have worked so hard to set up is going to be broken. The main event of the Muram competition. A free-for-all where thousands of players fight on a single stage. The tension in the stadium grew higher as time passed. When he glanced to the side, Halgan was already sitting with his eyes closed. He must be preparing for a full-scale fight. The main event of the Muram competition will begin shortly. A message appeared in the air. Yu Won's eyes met with those of several players. They were already staring at Yu Won as if they had made a promise. How interesting. There was one familiar face. Jegel Jinqian, is that guy the center? Jegel Jinqian was a player known as a genius in Muram along with Namgung Hoon. He was supposed to become a ranker in the future, but he had a rather eccentric personality. I'm telling you this. 10. The moment the countdown began. You're my only opponent. Halgan suddenly said something unexpected. So don't lose to anyone else. He could tell right away what was in Halgan's eyes. Competitive spirit. With his friend and goal right in front of him, Halgan was more motivated than ever. Now I see how he came up so quickly. Halgan's changed future. It wasn't simply the result of the tutorial. For Halgan, who had always been the best, the emergence of a goal that he couldn't surpass was a great stimulus. 5, 4, 3. Anyway, he had to give an answer. Yu Won pulled out his rustic sword and answered. That won't happen, and the same goes for you. 1. All the numbers were reduced. Start. Boom. The pent-up tension exploded, and one by one, they began to move. Spear, twang, bang, quagwagwag, bang, die. Hey, why are you suddenly yelling at me? This main event is like that. You have to fight as fast as you can to get noticed. Then die quickly. The first to move were the greedy players. Those who had already given up on winning and wanted to catch the eye of the many guilds among the spectators, even for a moment. On the other hand, most of the players aiming for victory were watching the situation. There's no point in using up stamina early. However, once the fire was lit, it was inevitable that it would turn into a battlefield. Thousands of players entangled like that. And in between them. Thwack! A sword flew towards the back of Yu Won's head. Chi-ji-ji-ji. The sword did not touch Yu Won's body and scratched the floor. Yu Won turned his body and saw a sword shimmering colorlessly in his eyes. Magic sword. In Muram, it was a skill called sword key. There can't be only one. Yu Won's head lifted up. At the same time, Yu Won's smoothly curved sword blocked the spear that was slashing down from above. Clang! It was a powerful blow. However, it wasn't Yu Won's sword that shook, but the spear that had attacked from behind. Chalk! The spearman, realizing that his surprise attack had failed, hurriedly retreated. Yu Won looked around without moving from his spot. Don't think it's too unfair. Jegel Jin Cheon. He approached Yu Won while taking out his fan. The Heavenly Demon Cult is an old enemy of our alliance. Yu Won also knew about the bad blood between the Heavenly Demon Cult and the Muram. Although it was only in the records, it was like a history and legend of the Muram. Swish, flap, one by one, the Muram players scattered around the stadium turned their direction towards Yu Won. Since it had become a pandemonium in an instant with the start, this sight probably wouldn't feel unnatural. Did they change the rules for this? He didn't know who came up with the idea, but it was simple and effective. If there was a fight with thousands of people tangled together, it would be natural for there to be one-on-many fights. Furthermore, it would be natural for many to join forces against a powerful person like Yu Won. There's nothing unfair about it. Wu Wong. Yu Won's sword also had a magic blade. They're all just a bunch of rabble anyway. A much darker color than the Muram players in front of him. Jegel Jin Cheon looked surprised as the aura rose more than 1 meter. Indeed, he lives up to his name. How much magic stat would he need to have to create a magic sword of that size? He must have at least 60 stats, if not more. It was definitely not the level of a player in the lower floors. Even so, the rumors are exaggerated. The Kim Yu Won of the rumors was like an insurmountable wall. There was even a ridiculous rumor that Kim Yu-won might already be close to being a ranker. However, the Kim Yu-won he met in person was great, but not to that extent. It's enough. Jegul Jin Cheon's eyes sparkled. The calculation was over. Now that he was sure, it was time to put it into action. Thud. Jegul Jin Cheon opened his fan with force. And that was the signal. Numerous players scattered in all directions rushed towards Yu-won. Now, cover him. That moment, zap, yellow electricity rippled. The Murim players who were running towards Yu-won were pushed away in all directions, their bodies charred black. In an instant, an empty circle was created with Yu-won at the center. Yu-won was the only one who wasn't affected. Hey, you bastards! The owner of the electricity was Hargan. He growled at Jegul Jin Cheon and the other players around him. Isn't this going too far? Chapter 86. The wave of electricity that swept through the arena was enough to silence the entire stadium. That was how powerful the impact of the electricity that Hargan had just released was. What the hell, Hargan, why is he suddenly acting like that? The other players in the arena who had been watching Hargan and Yu-won, who was growling, began to move again one by one. No matter how curious they were about Hargan's next move, they couldn't just stand there with a sword pointed at them. Chong, chong, quagwa, pung. Once again, the sounds of swords and spears clashing and skills exploding could be heard from all over the arena. Jegul Jin Cheon closed the fan he had been holding open. He looked at Hargan with a much more serious expression than before. Can I take it that your actions are to help Kim Yu-won? Hargan's eyebrows twitched at Jegul Jin Cheon's question. What if it is? I thought we could have a good relationship with your family. Whoever thought that is an idiot. This time, it was Jegul Jin Cheon's expression that distorted. It was an idea that came from the head of the Wulin Alliance's general, Jegul Kyung. As the Wulin strategist, he had been the one who had actually led the Wulin Alliance until now. To call an idea that came from Jegul Kyung's head idiotic. More than anything, there was no child who could tolerate someone insulting their father. What's wrong? Are you a dwarf? How dare you use such vulgar language? Because you're doing something vulgar. I'm just matching your level. Hargan said that and looked around him. The players who had been charging towards Yu-won just a moment ago. Hargan was clearly showing hostility toward them. What is this? How can we fight something like that? It's a monster, for real. The players who had lost their fighting spirit after seeing Hargan's one attack. The heated atmosphere cooled down as if cold water had been poured over it. This wasn't a good turn of events. But didn't you say that Olympus and Kim Yu-won were enemies? And then, a useless comment came out of someone's mouth. How did you know that? Hargan didn't miss that comment. And neither did Yu-won. So there was someone from Olympus in the Jegul family. This was the first time Yu-won had heard about this. He knew that the Wulin Alliance was divided into the Namgung and Jegul families, but he didn't know that Olympus was mixed up in it. It seemed that the reason they had created this plan was because they thought that Hargan would side with Yu-won. You really have done a lot. Bitterness seeped into Hargan's voice. He wasn't talking to the Jegul family. He was talking to Olympus. Don't bother with useless words and make a choice. Will you side with Kim Yu-won here and now, or not? At Jegul Jin Cheon's words, Yu-won looked at Hargan's back. Unlike other places, the Wulin competition was a public event. It was a place where countless spectators watched. Also, the Wulin competition could be watched from anywhere through the player kit. That meant that Hargan's actions would definitely be known to Olympus. Yu-won was known as an enemy of Olympus. Helping him would be going against the will of Olympus. The Jegul family has always been long-winded. Bang! Hargan slammed his two fists together. You should stop talking uselessly and hurry up and attack. I already made that choice a long time ago. I see. At the hot-blooded answer without hesitation, Jegul Jin Cheon opened his fan again. I will deal with you from now on. The wind began to blow around Jegul Jin Cheon, who was holding his fan open. Hurry up and subdue Kim Yu-won and join us. Are you going to be okay? Our opponent is Hargan. I know, Hargan. I've heard the name a lot. Jegul Jin Cheon nodded at the group's concerns. Just a moment ago, it was clear enough. Hargan was strong, stronger than any other player he had seen so far. Kim Yu-won, who was called the strongest player, was great, but Hargan was a cut above him when he met him in person. However, and I am Jegul Jin Cheon. The group was relieved by Jegul Jin Cheon's confident answer. Yes, he was Jegul Jin Cheon, a player called a genius who would lead Murim along with Namgung Hoon. His confidence soon spread to the rest of the group. However, flash, crackle, in that short time, Hargan reached right before Jegul Jin Cheon's eyes. Who are you? Quote exclamation mark quote. Boom, crackle crackle, a fist stretched out, and Jegal Jinqian's body flew back over 10 meters. Jegal Jinqian was pushed away and barely managed to catch his body without screaming. Aha, crackle, crackle, his body became charred black as if it had been electrocuted. It was in the blink of an eye. Jegal Jinqian struggled and braced himself to keep from collapsing. No, he had to try not to lose consciousness. What is this? With his blurry consciousness, Jegal Jinqian looked at Hargan with misty eyes. He had known that the pure-blood descendants of Olympus would be strong. Especially Hargan, who had inherited the blood of Zeus, the king of Olympus. It was natural that he was outstanding. But still. Thud, his pride was hurt, and he gritted his teeth. There's no way there could be such a big difference. His mind spoke. There was no way, and then his mind shouted again. This was something he could never win against. Where did a guy without any family history come from? Hargan, who had turned Jegal Sega into a man without a family history in an instant, said as he cracked his knuckles. Are you going to roll around and cry? Go ahead and cry. Hargan approached Jegal Jinqian and glanced at Yuan. There was no need to grandly avoid his fan or anything. That was the signal. Thud, should I continue what I was doing earlier? He took a step toward the Murim players who were surrounding him. Before Yuan could get into a full-fledged fight, he began to clean up the annoying flies. Surrender. Me too. Surrender. Me too. I can't give up arg. The main competition was ripening. As time passed, their stamina dropped and injuries increased, so the number of players surrendering increased. There were also players who refused to give up and lost their lives. And among them, Jegal Jinqian raised both of his hands. I lost. Phew. Hargan's fist, which was reaching for Jegal Jinqian's head, stopped. He wasn't the type to attack an opponent who had no intention of fighting. Jegal Jinqian, who was relieved that his fist had stopped, sighed and spoke. I lost. I won't give up. Are you surrendering? Yes. The fight was short. With his skills, he could only take a few of Hargan's punches. Even that was something he wouldn't have been able to block if Hargan had really put his mind to it. With that skill, what did you think you could do? Even if you hadn't suddenly interfered, I would have succeeded. Do you really think so? Hargan looked at Yuan, who was swinging his sword and moving through the Murim players. If you went over there, do you think you could catch that guy? Jegal Jinqian didn't answer. It was a silence of affirmation. At least, that's how it seemed on the surface. Well. Hargan glared at Yuan. One by one, Yuan's appearance as he swung his sword and cut down the players one by one was certainly strange. It seems that your skills have not deteriorated. Are you conserving your energy? It had been quite a while since Yuan had seen Hargan. After the tutorial and after the first floor, Hargan had shown remarkable growth. Of course, Yuan's growth would have been the same. He had heard rumors that he was the strongest player, so he thought he would have gotten several times stronger. If that's the case, crunch. Hargan started to walk towards Yuan. Let's get it started. Most of the players from the Murim faction who had been getting in the way had already been taken care of. Moreover, the atmosphere had become quite ripe after the main event had started, so it seemed like this was enough for the stage. Crackle. With each step he took, the ground beneath Hargan's feet sank. Yuan's body, who had been swinging his sword, turned around. Yuan, who found Hargan approaching him, lowered his sword and asked. Are we going to start now? I've waited long enough. His face was filled with excitement. Crackle. Intense electricity began to wrap around Hargan as if it was about to explode at any moment. Fruits harvested at the right time are the sweetest. From those words, Yuan could tell how long Hargan had been looking forward to fighting him. It seemed like he had been waiting for a very long time. And now, Hargan, who had finally given up on his patience, approached Yuan. I still have a lot left, but anyway, the final match didn't matter whether it was sooner or later. Before Yuan could get into position, he opened his mouth. Let me ask you two things. Two things. It seems like you've been patient for a long time, so be patient a little longer. Hargan nodded. What is it? First, do you regret that decision just now? Opposing Jegal Se, who was being helped by Olympus, and instead helping Yuan, his enemy. That was the action that Hargan had just taken. In a word, it was a full-scale confrontation with Olympus. I'm not an idiot. There was no hesitation in his answer. I know what the consequences of my actions will be. I know and I acted. So, of course, why would I regret it? He had heard the answer to the first question. What's the second question? As if this was the end, Hargan raised his energy even more. And so did Yuan. The second question is, buzz, buzz. Beautiful mana was attached to the dark ink-colored sword. Did you already forget what happened when you got hit by me in one shot in the past? Veins appeared on Hargan's forehead as he recalled what had happened at the time. Yeah, I remember it well, he couldn't forget it. The day he was first defeated by someone who wasn't a ranker. At that moment, the shock was still vivid in his mind. Then let me ask you this. The distance between Hargan and you became very close. Do I still look the same as I did then? No, Hargan's expression relaxed slightly. But only for a moment. You look smaller. Yeah. Crackle. Hargan's boiling electricity shot up. Let's get started. Swish. He was about to extend his fist. The distance was already close enough. Both the fist and the sword were within each other's range. Yu-Won didn't try to distance himself or avoid Hargan's fist. He intended to face Hargan's fist, which was filled with the power of electricity, head-on. Boom, boom, boom. The magic sword emitted a rapid vibration. Hargan, who thought he was ready, finally extended his fist. Bang! A sword and a fist collided. A loud noise erupted in the center of the stadium. Rumble. At that moment, crack, very quietly, a crack appeared on Yu-Won's sword. The crack on the sword was reflected in Yu-Won's eyes. This is the limit. Chapter 87. There is a saying called Qianwaqian, heaven beyond the heavens. Thwack thwack thwack. Boom. That was the thought that came to the minds of the players participating in the Muram competition. What is all this? Are they both real players? Not rankers. Gee, get back. Get out of the way. What? Og. Crackle crackle. Boom. Players scattered around the stadium were caught in the electric current emitted from Hargan's fist. The range of the electric current was so wide that it was difficult to predict. They thought they were quite a distance away, but they were caught in the range of the electric current in an instant. Forfeit. Me too. Damn it, I can't stay here any longer. I forfeit too. How can we win against such things? The stage no longer allowed other players to stand. All eyes were focused on the fight between Yu-Won and Hargan, and those who saw some of the players getting caught in the battle declared their forfeit. This is a real final. Namgungun also felt pathetic among them. Hargan, I've heard the name a lot, but I didn't know he was this good. He was barely able to protect his body from the electric current scattered everywhere by drawing out his internal energy. Hargan, he was a genius who was often compared to himself as the son of Zeus, the king of Olympus. He had heard his name a few times, and unknowingly, he had become competitive. However, Hargan's skill, which he saw in person, was far greater than he had heard. Even if there were several people of my level, they wouldn't be able to win against him. He thought that even with Yu-Won, he would be able to win at least the runner-up, but it seemed that he had been too arrogant. But, Namgungun's gaze shifted from Hargan to Yu-Won, who was struggling to block his attack. Did he really catch a ranker with that skill? Thwack! Yu-Won's body was pushed back by Hargan's fist. The sword, which had failed to neutralize the electric current, screamed in pain, and his skin gradually turned black. Boom! Hargan did not stop moving. Slash! Hargan, who had changed into yellow lightning, appeared next to Yu-Won in an instant. How high was his agility stat? Hargan's movements were so fast that it was hard to believe that he was a player who had not yet become a ranker. Boom! Thwack! Once again, a loud noise erupted from the center of the stadium. Hargan's eyes narrowed. Yu-Won was not pushed away. You're strong. Thank you for the compliment. But that sword, isn't it going to break soon? Even to the naked eye, Yu-Won's sword looked precarious. There were already cracks all over the blade, and it seemed like it would shatter like glass if it was touched. I don't understand. Crackle. What have you been doing all this time? Crackle crackle. Yellow lightning covered his body. At the same time, the tip of Yu-Won's sword moved. PFF'd. Flash. Light exploded from between the two. Rumble. Immediately after, there was a sound like lightning striking. Hargan took a step back at the heat he felt on his shoulder. Drip. Thud. Thud. Blood from his shoulder dripped down. It was a fairly deep stab wound. As he touched the wound with one hand, red blood came out on his palm. Hargan raised his head and looked at Yu-Won, whose whole body was flowing with yellow lightning. It was not him who had been damaged by the clash just now. Crackle, crackle, electricity flowed through his body. There were not many people who could get hit by that much current with their bare bodies and survive. Are you alive? Yu-Won raised his head. His expression did not change as he calmly replied. Of course, I thought so. Hargan raised his fist again. He had also been wounded, but it was Yu-Won who had been damaged anyway. His physical abilities are one step ahead of mine. Harkin's physical abilities were also considerable. Harkin was also quite capable in terms of physical abilities. Yuan raised his head. Strength, agility, stamina, and other such stats were high, so he was quite confident even in hand-to-hand combat without using mana. But if you just looked at those aspects, Yuan was superior to Harkin. On the other hand, my magic power is a few levels higher. Harkin made full use of that point. And, a sword that seemed like it could break at any moment. First, I'll break the weapon. Once the goal was set, the movements became clearer. Harkin quickly closed the distance again. The direction the fist was headed wasn't a vital point. Rather, it blatantly struck the sword. Bang, bang, bang. Clang. As if doing boxing, he continuously threw punches. The cracks on the sword quickly grew with a sharp sound. Soon, clang, the force put into the fist grew stronger. Now, with his eyes wide open, Harkin extended his right hand. Electricity exploded from his fist, which extended with a dazzling light. Flash, crackle, the sound was too loud and the light too intense, so the distant audience couldn't tell what was going on. But Harkin, who was fighting, couldn't be more thrilled. Clang, the sword broke. The sword that had been shaking dangerously shattered like glass, becoming countless fragments. It was a moment of certain victory. That's amazing. A calm voice. For a moment, the sweetness of victory, Harkin instinctively felt that something was wrong. He was clearly the one who had seized the victory. Amazing. Harkin looked at Yuan, who was nonchalantly dropping the hilt of the broken sword to the floor. In that moment, Wang, Yuan's mana pushed away Harkin's electricity. What the? Could this be the appearance of a giant? Suddenly, Yuan in front of him felt huge. Do you remember? Yuan's fist clenched, with incomparable brute force to just a moment ago. When you hit me once and sent me flying before. Shuaik, the moment he felt the fist flying close. Crack, he felt a shock to his face and lost consciousness. This crazy, thud, whoosh, Harkin's body floated up and flew across the middle of the stadium. Boom, thud, 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 Harkin's body, which had been rolling around the stadium, flopped to the floor. Only his body shaking intermittently and his shoulders lifting with difficulty confirmed that he was alive. Huh, what the players remaining on the stadium. The game isn't over yet. Yuan waved his hand towards them. We don't have time, so let's start quickly. Clang, Yuan picked up the hilt that had fallen to the floor. Broken nameless sword, category, weapon, a sword made by mixing various materials. Its mana conductivity is the worst, but its blade is well honed. It seems like it could be used for butchering. Currently broken, a sword that was commissioned to Hephaestus. It was a sword with no name and no utility. There was only one use. The mana conductivity really is the worst. It was the first time he had used it properly. The nameless sword wasn't an item that could be used in battle. From the beginning, it was a sword that he had intended to use only until it broke. There was no better item to practice mana control. And, it was probably enough to fool their eyes. Thanks to the effect of suppressing mana, it must have seemed like Yuan and Harkin's abilities were similar from the audience seats. Among these spectators, there were quite a few players and rankers from Olympus. Also, there would probably be rankers who would fight Yuan in the future. The Martial World Tournament was a place where countless eyes could see. It was difficult to deceive the eyes of rankers with just acting. The last blow was a little nerve-wracking, though. He had unleashed a blow, judging that he couldn't prolong the fight any longer since the sword was broken. But to this extent, it should have fooled their eyes. Lifting his head, Yuan looked at the screen above the stadium. It showed him standing in the middle of the arena. Below it was the caption. Winner. Yuan's gaze moved to the players collapsed on the floor. Kim Yu-won. He had barely used any mana in his fights, so he was drenched in sweat. Still, there was quite a bit of mana left. Nam Dong-hoon had forfeited instead of fighting Yuan. He had said that he'd seen the outcome before, but Yuan thought it was because he was embarrassed by the actions of Jegal Jinchian and the other Murim players. The winner of the 834th Murim competition is player Kim Yu-won. The announcer for the competition was an errand boy from the 10th floor. He suddenly appeared, dancing in the air. He was a wooden doll wearing a tuxedo that didn't fit into the world of Murim, and there was a small case floating above his head. The errand boy flew over to Yuan and asked, "How do you feel about winning?" "It was fun. Is that all?" "Yeah." Short and simple answers. The errand boy had seen the Murim competition many times, but these answers made it hard to continue. "Ah, yes, I understand. Then shall we start presenting the prizes?" It was time. Yuan nodded and extended his hand, as if to say, "Hurry up and give it to me." Click. The case, which was the size of a palm, opened. Even though they were far apart, a brilliant bitter smell stung his nose. It was a smell he had smelled before. Great Return Pill. Inside the case was a small, red pill. It was an elixir known as the representative item of Murim, and the amount of money and time it took to produce one was astronomical. It was also a treasure that all players and rankers desired. Yes, as you all know, the prize is the Great Return Pill. The manufacturer, Shaolin, said that this Great Return Pill was made especially well. I'll use it gratefully. Click. Yuan closed the case and put it in his inventory. With a short greeting, he turned around. He had no intention of listening to the talkative errand boy announcer any longer. It's going to take some time to digest. The Great Return Pill was a little bigger than he remembered. Plus, it would take a few days to fully absorb the mana inside the Great Return Pill. That side, Yuan's gaze turned to one side of the audience seats. I can leave it to them. Qian Mu Jin had gone to negotiate with Murim. Namgung Jin Woon had reached out to the Heavenly Demonic Cult first, and the Heavenly Demonic Cult had accepted. There was no need to worry since they were the two highest-ranking people in Murim. Even if it was just Qian Mu Jin, he had enough power to wipe out all the Murim rankers there by himself. If the Heavenly Demonic Cult joins, Murim's power will at least double. A guild that encompassed a world and even had high rankers. Murim, with the Heavenly Demonic Cult, could no longer be called a mid-level guild. Now, it would have the size of a large guild. Not bad. Yuan had only thrown a small stone, but it would cause the world of the 10th floor to change rapidly because of it. Murim and the Heavenly Demonic Cult were guilds that had fought on the front lines in the war with the Outer. It was a good thing, not a bad thing, for such a guild to grow. Thud, thud, Yuan walked along quickly. Now, it was the 20th floor. The tests would become more difficult, and it was a world that was one of the largest on the tower, after Murim. Thinking about what he had to do in that world, there was a lot he had to prepare for, starting now. First of all, Yuan's gaze moved to the case in his hand. I'll achieve my target stats. Chapter 88. Once the Qianma Divine Church and Namgang Sega joined hands, there was no longer any room for Jegal Sega to stand. The winner of the Murim Grand Competition had been decided. The room was deathly silent. Everyone was busy watching Qian Mujin's expression. Among them, Jegal Kyung was thinking faster than anyone else. Why Hargan? Hargan was clearly on Olympus' side. As the son of Zeus, his status was more certain than anyone else's. And Eugene was known as their enemy within Olympus. The only common ground between the two was that they were from the same tutorial session. However, that alone did not explain their relationship. Anyway, we've overcome one big hurdle. The one who broke the heavy silence was Namgang Jinwoon. Naturally, everyone's gaze turned to Namgang Jinwoon. Awkward laughter began to spread. Ha, ha ha, why, yes, this Murim Grand Competition was also very successful. Yes, it was a feast for the eyes. It is the prosperity of Murim. Ha ha ha. It was a much more exaggerated reaction than usual. Clearly, those who had been worried about what would happen if the sub-leader of the Qianma Divine Church won were now saying that it was the prosperity of Murim. It was ridiculous. Qian Mujin watched them with an expressionless face. Now there seems to be one more big thing left. Namgang Jinwoon's gaze turned to Jegal Kyung and Moon So-baek. Moon So-baek avoided his gaze, while Jegal Kyung raised his head even more stiffly. What do you plan to do by bringing in the demonic cult? The atmosphere in the room, which had been gradually loosening up, became even heavier. Jegal Kyung and Namgang Jinwoon began to fight with their auras. The surrounding rankers were busy watching the two of them. They knew that they didn't get along well, but they had never seen them clash head-on like this before. Bringing in the demonic cult, it doesn't sound very good, sir. Isn't it the truth? It's not the demonic cult, but the Qianma Divine Church. We didn't bring them in, we asked for an alliance. That's what it is. Isn't it much better than bringing in Olympus? What? Olympus? Lord, what are you talking about? The crowd stirred at Namgang Jinwoon's words. The air had become heavy and cold, and the room was filled with mana emanating from Namgang Jinwoon. The affairs of Murim should be resolved within Murim. Are you saying that we should give this world to Olympus? Namgang Jinwoon's tone of voice had changed. The respect and consideration were gone, replaced by a sharp and aggressive voice. You should be ashamed, Jegal Kyung. Qua. Namgang Jinwoon's momentum filled the room. The lion who had been pretending to be gentle since becoming the leader of the Murim alliance finally began to roar. Jegal Kyung was one of the top 5 most powerful people in Murim. He wasn't directly facing his sword, and he wasn't afraid of just his momentum. At this moment, there was something else that Jegal-kyung was really afraid of. The fact that the Lord, who had been watching, has moved. It was the change in Namgang Jinwon that began with the Cheonma Divine Church's joining. Did he already know? Perhaps he knew everything about the relationship between himself and Olympus, and even had evidence. The reason he had been cowering until now was only one thing. Because more than half of Murim was already on Jegal-kyung's side, and he didn't have the confidence to fight head-on. But, the balance of power has been broken now that the Cheonma Divine Church, and Cheonma, have joined. Moreover, the justification had already been crossed. Jegal-kyung's shoulders slumped. It's over. At the sight of Jegal-kyung, who offered no resistance, the rankers who had accompanied him bowed their heads one by one. They had sensed it too. Since Cheonma Sangyo and Namgungsga have joined hands, there is no longer any place for Jegal-sega to stand. From now on, it was the era of Namgungsega and Cheonma Sangyo. I'm sorry to interrupt your family fight, but I have one question. Cheonmu-jin looked around the rankers in the room and called out one name. Who is Moon So-baek? With Namgung-hoon's help, Yu-won found Namgungsega's training room. Like Cheon-san's training room, it was a place with a structure that could not be opened from the outside, and Yu-won rented the training room for a total of 10 days. It was a place that required an astronomical amount of money just to rent for a day, but Yu-won didn't need any separate points. Of course, the winner of the Murim competition deserves this much benefit. Don't make fun of Namgungsega. It was a remark full of pride in Namgungsega. Yu-won thought of the old days when he first entered Namgungsega's huge estate after a long time. It seemed really big back then. It was the first palace-like house he had ever seen since entering the tower. At first, Yu-won also dreamed of becoming a ranker of Namgungsega. Now it looks small. In this huge tower, there were several castles much larger in scale than Namgungsega. Olympus had a palace as big as a small country, as did Asgard and the City of Heaven. Creak. Yu-won entered the training room and closed the thick iron door, 2 spans thick. The training room itself was not very spacious. About half the size of Cheon-san's training room. Thug, thug, footsteps echoed inside the training room. The sound was completely blocked from the outside. It was thanks to the fact that the training room was made by mixing black iron. Click. Yu-won opened the container right away. A fragrant, bitter smell stimulated the tip of his nose. It was the smell of Daewon-dan. Daewon-dan hash, an elixir made once every 3 years in Shaolin. Made with hundreds of ingredients and a special manufacturing method known only to Shaolin. Hash, when taken, a considerable amount of magical power is acquired. The explanation itself was nothing special. It was similar to other typical elixirs. However, the hundreds of ingredients described in the explanation were the key to this Daewon-dan. As time passed, the manufacturing method developed, and the value of Daewon-dan gradually increased. 1 in 3 years. It was not a way to increase the value of Daewon-dan. This was because the Murim and Shaolin had to join forces to create just one. Even so, there were times when Daewon-dan was not the product of the Murim competition because the ingredients for Daewon-dan could not be obtained. Yu-won took out the Daewon-dan without hesitation. The probability is 50 to 50. Magical power close to 100. No matter how great the Daewon-dan was, he could not be sure that it would raise his stats right away. It was only 1, but it is not easy to go from 99 to 100. Well, I'll have to try it to find out. It's not something he had acquired with great difficulty anyway. Yu-won immediately poured the Daewon-dan into his mouth. Swish, gulp, the feeling of Daewon-dan was strange. As soon as it entered his mouth, the pill, which had been hard until just a moment ago, melted like soft jelly. The Daewon-dan, which instantly turned into liquid, went down the airway with a cool feeling. Su, a refreshing mana entering his body. It was indeed pure mana. It was Yu-won's first time taking Daewon-dan. In his previous life, he had finished as the runner-up of the Murim competition. The effectiveness of Daewon-dan varies greatly depending on who takes it. In Murim, they talk about the use of history and mind techniques, but the important thing is concentration. How much more mana can you hold on to? Yes, he recalled what his friends who had taken Daewon-dan had said. There was only one key. Hold on. Yu-won sat on the floor in a comfortable position. After that, he grabbed the energy of Daewon-dan that had entered his body. In that moment, the energy of the Daewon-dan inside Wu-won's body began to violently rebel. Drip. Sweat dripped from his forehead. The blood in his body flowed backwards and seemed to move like a raging wave. He felt like it would escape out of his body at any moment if he didn't concentrate. Calm down. The more Wu Wen tried to infuse his will, the more violently the energy rebelled. It was difficult to handle at first. Every time he felt the energy leaking out, he felt like he could cry tears of regret. However, as time passed, he gradually got the hang of holding on to the energy. Tisk, tisk. The waves that had been fluctuating inside his body gradually subsided. The Daewon Dan, which had melted into liquid, turned into mana and flowed into Wu Wen's body. It had calmed down, but it still wasn't all Wu Wen's. The first step is over. The first task was to withstand the force generated as the Daewon Dan melted and to prevent it from escaping as much as possible. And the second was to make the mana he had captured his own. To absorb all of this, Wu Wen's brow furrowed. It'll take some time, that's what he thought. Su. A change began in Wu Wen's body, where the Daewon Dan had melted. The Daewon Dan, which had turned into liquid, rapidly emitted pure mana. The mana flowed slowly like a wave and seeped into Wu Wen's body. Squirm. That was the beginning. Su-ah, su-ah. Wu Wen's body began to rapidly absorb the energy of the melted Daewon Dan. What? Just a moment ago, he had been struggling to prevent the energy of the Daewon Dan from leaking out. After the Daewon Dan had completely melted and transformed into mana, he didn't have to exert any more effort. It was as if the mana was submitting itself to Wu Wen and becoming his own. Is it because of the ruler of mana skill? He felt it whenever he took an elixir related to mana, but the ruler of mana skill had the ability to maximize the efficiency of the elixir. Thanks to this, the absorption, which would have normally taken several days, became easier. If it's like this, Wu Wen made up his mind and spread the mana that had entered his body throughout his blood vessels. Su-yu-yu. There's no reason to slow down. The mana itself wanted to become Wu Wen's. It was what he had been hoping for. Not a single drop of mana was wasted. Wu Wen felt his body fill with pure, refreshing mana and lay still, enjoying the feast. And when he had absorbed most of the mana, still no good. He had obtained a larger amount of mana than he had expected through the Daewon Dan. However, he still hadn't received a message saying that his stats had increased. Is it a little short? Even if it was the same 99 stat, there was a difference in the amount of mana, but in the end, he had failed to reach 100 stats. If it doesn't work with the Daewon Dan, then next. As Wu Wen was thinking about his next plan, mana has increased by 1. Mana has reached 100 stats. A unique skill will be unlocked upon reaching a certain stat. A new dimension of sensation was carved into Wu Wen's body. His eyes flashed, and his senses expanded. Done. Just because he had achieved the same stat, it didn't mean he would necessarily gain the same power. However, the development of abilities through stats was a player's unique ability. Just because he had lost his power after returning to the past, it didn't mean that it had completely disappeared. And before returning to the past, the unique skill that Wu Wen possessed was a skill that was only comparable to Sun Ogong's flaming golden eyes. You have acquired sensory territory. Wu Wen's eyes opened with a flash. Crimson pupils, fire eyes. Along with it, the sensory territory, a skill that represented Wu Wen's highest sensory rank, was activated. And just like that, his broken wings grew back. Chapter 89. Anyway, Olympuswan Kareafiwakiljons. The 20th floor was large. But that size was nothing compared to how small it felt. The world was large, but there wasn't much land that people could live on. Over 90% of the world was covered in water, so the only people who could live there were the merfolk. But that didn't mean that the remaining 10% of the land was abandoned. It was actually the opposite. Even though it was only 10%, the land was still large enough, and the world where there was a lot to eat continued to develop. The maritime kingdom of Portugal. There was a legend there. The one who finds the sea stone will become the god of the sea. Neptune, one of the 12 islands of Portugal. In that island, which was the smallest of all the islands, there was a battle that never seemed to end. It's a charming legend. If you can get your hands on it, you can become a god. A group of just over 10 players threatened 2 large men and women. The man and woman, who were over 2 meters tall, trembled and backed away against the wall. Please spare us. Please. What did we do wrong? Why are you doing this? Ha ha ha. Spare us. What did we do wrong? Hee hee. What a waste of size. What a waste of size. Are all the giants like this? Cowards. Don't you think it's hard to hide once you get bigger? Huh. These kids are probably not even 10 years old yet in our years. Really, but they're this big, they'll probably grow to at least 4 meters. Annoying kids. Let's make sure to do a good job when Asgard reaches out to us. Why are we even bothering with these? The giants and Asgard were originally on friendly terms. But ever since some giants started to join hands with the demons, Asgard let go of the giants they had been holding hands with. Since then, situations like this had continued to happen. All sorts of insults and curses were thrown at the two giants. The two giant players trembled and backed further and further into the corner. Didn't I tell you? That legend from earlier. What legend? I'm talking about the sea stone. The man with red hair who seemed to be the leader of the group approached them. Where is it? The two giant man and woman checked the emblem engraved on the players' chests. An emblem of a wolf with red fur. It was the Red Wolf Guild, notorious on the lower and middle floors. I heard that the giants are hiding the sea stone. Do you really believe that nonsense? At the giant man's question, the man from the Red Wolf Guild smirked. I don't believe it all. But isn't it the most likely possibility? Do you know where that rumor came from? Isn't it Olympus? There's no source more certain than that. You know what kind of relationship Olympus and us have, right? I know. That's why we're doing this. The man put his hand on the hilt of his sword. Anyway, Olympus wouldn't care if we killed the giants. The 20th floor was a world under the jurisdiction of Olympus. The management bureau was mostly made up of Olympus rankers and players, and if an incident or accident related to the giants broke out, they would usually cover it up. It was possible because Olympus wanted to eradicate the giants in the first place. If you don't want to die, tell me. Where is the Stone of the Sea? So, I'm telling you, there's no such thing. It's a false rumor spread by Olympus to catch us. The two giants went berserk, but nothing changed. The man seemed to be listening and not listening, as if he had heard an unwanted answer. Oh, really? The man turned his head and looked around at his other colleagues. They were guild members who had been together for quite a long time. Now, he could tell what they were thinking just by looking at their eyes. Well, let's see if you say the same thing later. Screech, clang, clang. The players pulled out their weapons and prepared their skills. The two giant men and women gritted their teeth as they were surrounded by such players. It was obvious that they wouldn't listen to anything they said from now on. Don't kill them, just cut off one of their limbs. Then they'll tell you what they know. Why are there such evil people in such a peaceful world these days? At the voice that broke the flow, the executive of the Red Wolf Guild, Tiger, frowned. He turned his head and saw someone walking towards them from the alley. Evil people, who is that kid? He doesn't know his place. Do you know who we are? The Red Wolf Guild was composed of players from the 20th to 50th floors. Moreover, the guild leader was a ranker with a fairly high ranking, so the Red Wolf Guild was quite well known in the lower floors. Hey, don't play the apostle of justice for nothing and get out of here. If you don't want to see blood, just let him go. It'll be noisy if we kill someone who's not even a giant. Asgard has been keeping an eye on things lately. Those guys pretend to be good anyway. That's what I'm saying. Just when they were about to ignore him, knowing that there was only one opponent, the voice came closer. It's not a game, it's real. Swish, and just like that, Yuan walked between them. And I have something to do here. What, is this kid interested in the Stone of the Sea too? Hey, everyone be careful. The players of the Red Wolf Guild began to be wary as they watched Yuan leisurely walking between them. If they weren't fools, they could tell that he had some confidence to come into the middle of them like this. Which guild are you from? Identify yourself. And no matter what kind of background you have, this isn't the way to do it. We have rules here too. Wait a minute. Tiger stopped the other guild members and looked at Yuan, who was approaching the two giants. That guy, somewhere, a familiar face, a familiar face. At that moment, hey, wait a minute, are you thinking of that guy too? Several guild members whispered to each other. It seemed that they were thinking the same thing as the tiger. Kim Yuan. The tiger glared at Yuan. His voice was low and his eyes flashed fiercely. Is that right? Yuan nodded. After the Muram competition, the number of people who recognized Yuan's face had increased significantly. The tiger was one of them. So now are we going to settle this with words? You might be quite skilled on the 20th floor, but is that all? No matter how great you are, we also graduated from the 20th floor long ago. Most of the players in the Red Wolf Guild were players from the floors above the 20th floor. Furthermore, the executive, the tiger, was a player from a floor much higher than the 20th floor. No matter how much Yuan was the winner of the Muram competition, he was just a player from the 20th floor. Do you believe in the heavenly demon cult? No. Yu-won stood between the two giants and the Red Wolf Guild and turned around. Nothing. The tiger, who met Yu-won's eyes, frowned. There was only one opponent. Furthermore, he was a player who had just reached the 20th floor. However, the weight of the name, Kim Yu-won, was so great that it ignored such indicators. Judging from the way he came out like this, he must have some kind of faith. With Yu-won's skills, he could join hands with a large guild at any time. There's no way we can be broken with the skills he showed at the Muram competition. But what if there are other colleagues nearby? What if that guy is being escorted by someone from the Heavenly Demon cult? It was a well-known fact that Yu-won was the sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon cult. Although there didn't seem to be anyone around right now, it was a burden to run into this many people right now. It's a shame to let go of the giants. With only 12 people, it was still uneasy. Swish! The tiger took his hand off the sword handle and turned around. Let's go back. Hung Nim, there's only one opponent. The tiger shook his head. Let's go back. There's no going back. The tiger didn't go back on his decisions once they were made. The party hesitated for a moment before finally leaving their seats as the tiger ordered. You're lucky. A growling voice. If it weren't for the Heavenly Demon cult, you would have been torn apart here. Yu-won looked at the tiger, who was glaring at him with killing intent. Yellow eyes. It was quite a fierce gaze. His sharp eyes, like those of a beast, seemed like they would cut him if he just got close. He's not an ordinary bastard. The mana flowing through the tiger's body was not ordinary. It was strange. Why is such a guy not known? Yu-won knew almost all the rankers. Moreover, the tiger was not an ordinary player. He held a fairly high position in the guild and had the skills to become a ranker. Yu-won turned his head at the loud voice that came from behind him. Tannen must have told him to speak softly, but the giant's voice was different from that of an ordinary person. Thanks for saving me. I wouldn't have saved you. Yu-won cut off the giantess's words and asked. Were you just going to take it? Yes, two giants shouldn't have to be scared of those kinds of guys. Giants are strong. They were born with overwhelming power. The giants were on par with the demons and dragons. Why don't you fight? The giantess hesitated to answer Yu-won's question. Then, you seem to know the giants well. The giant next to her asked. Unlike before, he was wary of Yu-won. It seemed to be because Yu-won seemed to know more about the giants than others. Yu-won nodded. A little bit. Which side are you on? Olympus, or Asgard? Brother, he helped us. He's still a human. Do you think he would have helped us for nothing? But still, that's right. Yu-won nodded. He looked straight into the eyes of the giant, who was about 3 heads taller than him. I didn't help you for no reason. Are you after the Stone of the Sea as well? Yu-won nodded at the giant's question. Yes, the Stone of the Sea. It was a dreamlike item for all the players who visited the 20th floor. An item that would make the one who obtained it a god. Countless players and rankers moved to find it, despite not knowing whether it actually existed. And Yu-won was no different. The difference was one thing. The Stone of the Sea exists. Unlike those who searched for it like a treasure hunt, Yu-won was confident. And even the method to obtain it. Damn it, why don't you believe us? Why? We don't know. The giant's furious scream shook the alley. His muscles, which covered his large body, twitched terribly. Listen carefully, we really don't know. We don't even know if the Stone of the Sea really exists, and if it does, we don't know where it is. I know. What? I know you don't know. Even more so, you don't have it. The giant narrowed his brow and asked. Then what do you want from us? I have business with another giant you know. Another giant? Erpa. The two giants looked surprised at the name mentioned. The giants in front of Yu-won were only a few decades old, which was like elementary school students in human terms. There was no business with such brats. I would like you to let me meet your elder. Chapter 90. The giant siblings were named Bar and Nuar. The older brother, Bar, had a somewhat more ferocious personality than his younger brother, Nuar. He was also much more vigilant, and his fists were always ready to fly. Nuar was relatively mild-mannered, but that didn't mean he wasn't vigilant. The answer to Yu-won's request was, no. How long are you going to follow us? Thud, thud. Behind the two of them walking around the alleyway, Yu-won followed. It had already been several hours. If you follow us, you'll eventually return to the group. I'll get rid of you before that. You're not going to fight. Bar gnashed his teeth at Yu-won's words. He couldn't be this annoying. No, can't you fight? I can fight, brother. Nuar, who was next to him, stopped Bar. He was worried that Bar might actually throw a punch if he couldn't control his temper. Bar, who had been glaring at Yuan for a while, turned his head away and started walking again. He's still holding back. Unlike their innate strength, the giants had many enemies. Olympus and Asgard, the giants, who had made these two huge guilds their enemies, were always careful in their actions. If they were to cause any trouble, Olympus would have an excuse to wipe them out at any time, saying, the giants are dangerous after all. He's young, but he's still deep inside. They were young siblings compared to their size. They were at an age where they were immature in controlling their emotions. However, Bar only growled, and Noir seemed to pay little attention to Yuan. What do I have to do to get you to do me a favor? The elder doesn't meet just anyone. Go back. I'm not just anyone. All humans are the same. That's what I was taught. A deep-rooted distrust of humans. It must be a common thought for all giants. They had been suffering from humans for too long. So get out before you get hurt. If I really wanted to, I could kill a bunch of guys like you, even if you ganged up on me. And Bar was one of the giants who was wary of and despised humans. In the end, he couldn't get what he wanted by persuading him with words. Really, then, from now on, he had no choice but to take a stronger approach. Do I only have to beat you? You, me, do you have the strength to do that with your skinny body? Try it if you're curious. Swish, Yuan reached out his hand. Their gazes met, and soon Bar reached out his hand. Noir watched the two of them quietly. The two of them weren't trying to fight right now. Clack, bam, Yuan and Bar shook hands. The size of their hands was several times different, but Bar's eyes widened as he held Yuan's hand. Look at this, his grip strength is pretty good. He's not being pushed back in strength even though he's holding the hand of a giant. He understood why he was so confident, even though he had just taken his hand. I've heard the name quite a bit, but what's his stats? What's this? Bauer was also a player, and he had heard of Wu Yun's name quite a bit. He felt a sense of unease. No matter what, he couldn't lose to a player who had just reached the 20th floor. Then let's begin. Brother, wait a minute. Noir squeezed between the two men. Bauer frowned at Noir, thinking he was being interrupted. Don't worry, we're not fighting. We're just arm wrestling. I can see that, but I'm in a bit of a hurry. What's wrong? Erpa the Elder has contacted us. At Noir's words, Bauer let go of Wu Yun's hand. Wu Yun was also interested in the name they were looking for. Did you contact him? Yeah, but I thought it would be better to tell you the news. What did he say? Well, Noir turned his head and spoke to Wu Yun. The Elder is also looking for you. Wu Yun followed behind Bauer and Noir. All the way, Bauer was showing a dissatisfied reaction. Why on earth is the Elder looking for that guy? He's a pretty famous person, though. So what if he's human? He's not even a ranker. Bauer glanced at Wu Yun. And no matter how I think about it, it's strange that he knows the Elder. Erpa was one of the most respected elders among the giants. He was quite old and sick now, but he had lived since long before the Gigantomachia. However, he had not participated in the Gigantomachia himself, and moreover, it was not known where he had settled down. The Elder must have a reason. But for now, it was Erpa himself who had called Wu Yun. Bauer and Noir led Wu Yun into the forest. The only forest in the world on the 10th floor. It was the so-called Giants' Forest. Weak. As soon as he arrived in the forest, Bauer put his fingers in his mouth and whistled loudly. Then, after a while, the ground shook and a group of beasts appeared. Kyung, Kung Kung, Kyung, 5 wolves. They were not ordinary wolves. You had to lift your head quite a bit to see them all. Big wolf. They were huge wolves that were over 2 meters tall and nearly 10 meters long. The existence of these guys was the reason why this forest was called the Giants' Forest. The beasts that inhabited the Giants' Forest were several times, or even dozens of times, larger than the original beasts. Please, Kururung, Kyung. At Bauer's gesture, the wolves docilely bowed their bodies. Bauer and Noir got on the wolves' backs. On the other hand, the wolves' reaction to Wu Yun was different. Yorurung. Their eyes were full of alert. Bauer looked at the wolves baring their teeth and said, "They're not food. Everyone, street, lie down." Haru, who was looking at the wolves, gestured. Then, after a moment, the wolves that had been making eye contact lowered their bodies. Whimper, whine. The big wolves lowered their tails. They even hid their sharply exposed teeth and claws. Far from being willing to fight, they seemed to be afraid of Haru. What? Bar's eyes widened. Haru's eyes had turned red. From the changed color from just a moment ago, Bar could tell that Haru had used some special skill. However, even so, He hadn't directly overwhelmed them in a fight, and just by making eye contact, the big wolves had lost their will to fight. Is it an illusion skill? Or a druid's taming skill? Whatever skill it was clear that the big wolves had submitted to Haru. On the 20th floor, the Forest of Giants was known to be forbidden. It was a hunting ground that even players on the 20th floor found difficult to challenge. It was the same not only for the 20th floor, but also for players on much higher floors. Bar, a giant, also remembered that he had struggled quite a bit to train the big wolves. What did you do? At Bar's question, Haru stroked the big wolf's head with one hand and said, "These guys are smart." Then he turned his head and looked at Bar. "Unlike some people. What? Let's go. We've got a ride." Haru jumped lightly and climbed onto the big wolf's back. Bar, who had been sulking for a moment, stroked the wolf's back. "Let's go." Kyung, Kyung. The big wolf began to leap forward. When he turned his head, the big wolf that Haru was riding was following close behind. Just then, Haru and Bar's eyes met. On the backs of the big wolves running fast, the two did not avoid each other's eyes. Something burned hot inside Bar. I want to fight him. Born as a giant, he had been harassed by other players countless times. However, during all that time, he had never considered them as opponents in a fight. It was no different from a small puppy barking cutely. He would listen to them if they barked, and he would let them bite him. He had continued to endure with the thought that he shouldn't fight like that. However, he found it difficult to do so only with Haru. A fighting spirit that he had felt for the first time in a long time. Oppa, Nyar, his younger sister, seemed to have noticed it as well. "You can't." At her resolute voice, Bar turned his head forward again. "I know." He used all the travel time to calm his boiling insides. The place they arrived at like that had a single, giant tree. "This is it." Thud. Bar jumped down from the big wolf's back. Nyar also followed him down. Haru looked up at the giant tree that stretched up to the clouds in the sky. "Adam, what do you think? Isn't it great? How is it? Isn't it great?" Bawur proudly spoke while looking at the tree. "It's a tree that will never fall nor burn. The elders say that it's one of the world trees, but I don't know much about that." Yu-Won also knew about it, since Adam was quite famous among the rankers. As the tree from which the first giant was born, Adam was like a treasure to the giants. "It'll never burn." Yu-Won remembered it clearly. Adam, the tree that burned to nothing during the Second Great Demon War. "No, the Forest of Giants. What are you doing? Come down." Bawur urged. Yu-Won, who had been looking at the scenery for a moment, followed Bawur down. As he followed Bawur, a giant passage appeared at the bottom of the tree, connected to the roots. "You better be careful with your actions from here on out." Thud. Footsteps echoed from the wide passage. "You might get stepped on if you make a mistake." Yu-Won nodded at Bawur's words. It was certain that the giants' perception of humans hit rock bottom after the Great Demon War. They learned to avoid fights and not cause trouble as much as possible for the giants' well-being, but there were always exceptions. Not all giants were as gentle as Bawur or Nyar. "Follow me." Thud, thud. It was dark under the tree. However, the embedded gems that were scattered throughout the place brightly lit up the interior like lanterns. This place was the giant's home. "What's that? A human?" "He's with Bawur and Nyar." "A guest? Really, a human?" The passing giants muttered as they looked at Yu-Won. Most of them were beings with strength that reached the ranker level. They were all looking at Yu-Won with interest. "Ignore them." Nyar spoke in a small voice that only Yu-Won could hear. "You're the elder's guest. You don't have to be afraid. It would be natural to be scared in this situation." He had entered the middle of the giant's den. Furthermore, it was impossible to imagine a giant that welcomed humans. As expected, "Hey, Bawur," a giant that looked to be about the same age as Bawur and Nyar approached them. He was a giant with broad shoulders and sharp eyes. "When did you get back?" "Just now." Bawur blocked Yu-Won's front along with his reply. It seemed that he was trying to hide Yu-Won with his size. The giant who approached them asked with a smile. "How's the Tower of Trials? I heard you climbed up a lot." "I've now reached the 49th floor. "That's pretty fast. Then did you come here to rest?" "Yeah, and to greet the elders." "Is that so?" The conversation up until now seemed to be a formal greeting. The giant peeked his head out and glared at Yu-Won, who was behind Bawur. "But what's that ant?" Chapter 91. Ant. It was a euphemism used by the giants to look down on humans. It was an unpleasant word to hear, even for those who didn't know what it meant. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would be able to tell right away that it wasn't a friendly word. "Quant." Bawur glared at the giant in front of him. "Watch your words." He is Elder Erpa's guest. Elders. His surprised expression didn't last long. Quant curled his lips and spoke mockingly. You've gotten old lately, so you're doing useless things. Quant, you know too, don't you, Bawur? The elder is just getting old and becoming a pacifist. You should be careful too. You have a body, so hanging around with that kind of person. Brother Quant, Nyar, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Please watch your words. Oh, right, sorry. Quant, who had been playfully answering, passed Bawur and walked away. At that moment, Yuan and Quant's eyes met. Quant, who was more than a meter taller, looked down at Yuan with disdain. Swish, Quant left without a word. Bawur glared at his back and muttered in a resentful voice. Just you wait, you little brother, please be patient. If we fight among ourselves, it will be hard on the elder. Then when will I fight? At the next test. Damn it. Bawur was a brother who listened better than he thought. Bawur, who had been scratching his head in irritation, asked Yuan, who was smiling, in a nervous voice. What's so funny? You look funny. Aren't you scared? None of these guys here welcome you. Aren't you guys the same? Oh, right, that's true. Bawur nodded and started walking again. Okay, hurry up and follow me. It's stuffy because you're so slow, so hurry up a bit. Perhaps because of the difference in height, Bawur continued to walk at Yuan's pace. Yuan followed behind Bawur, feeling the gazes of the other giants. As expected, I'm not very welcome. At this point, the giants were like a candle in the wind. It meant that it was a very sensitive time. If there are more guys like before, it's going to be a little tiring. The giant named Quant had openly picked a fight with Yuan. If Bawur and Nyar hadn't stepped in to stop him, and if he hadn't had the excuse of being a guest invited by an elder of the giants, there might have been a fight. This way, the place Bawur led him to had a huge wooden door. It was about 10 meters tall, and from the outside, it felt like the boss room of a dungeon. Of course, in reality, it was just a normal door. Elder, are you inside? Bawur asked in a cautious and gentle voice, unlike the way he had acted so far. The answer came a little later. Come in, creak. The door opened on its own. The wind blowing from the inside pushed the door open. Bawur stepped aside for a moment. After all, Yuan was Erpa's guest. Thud, thud, a big, wide room. No, from Yuan's point of view, it didn't feel like a room but rather a large cavity. The sound of Yuan's footsteps echoed in it, making him feel like a giant. Yuan finally realized that he had come to the land of giants. On a bed several times taller than Yuan, there was a rocking chair even taller than that, a dining table, chairs, a side table. Everything was several times, no, dozens of times larger than what Yuan knew. Compared to these, Bawur and Nyar weren't even giants. They were just humans with a little height. Creak. Nice to meet you. Yuan looked at the giant sitting in a rocking chair with a baby big wolf on his lap. It was a small voice, but his words echoed against the walls. What was your name? I'm getting old, so my memory is a little hazy these days. Unlike Bawur and Nyar, the giant's face was full of wrinkles. The giant had wrinkles all over his face, unlike Bar and Nyar. I've heard a lot about you. I've heard your name a lot from other kids coming up from below. He was a fairly old giant. It was known that once you became a ranker, you would no longer age, but he did not. There was one reason. Erpa had already aged before entering this tower. He was like the living history of the giants. Kim Yuan. Yuan rarely took such a polite stance. Regardless of anything else, Erpa was someone worthy of respect. Considering his achievements in leading the giants, he was more than qualified. Yes, Kim Yuan. I've heard a lot of stories. Where did you hear that? Hephaestus. That little brat talked about you like that. Yuan nodded at Erpa's answer. It was when Nyar first told him that Erpa was looking for him. Giant Elder, Erpa, if there was a way for him to know about him, it would have to be Hephaestus. I heard you're fighting Olympus. Yes, you're not even a ranker yet, but it's amazing that you've already reached the 20th floor. Thank you, but it's not courage, it's just arrogance. Yuan, who had his head bowed, looked up at Erpa. His narrowed eyes opened. They were too clear for the eyes of an old and sick man who was buried in a rocking chair. If you want to live, give up. Someone like you will fly away even if they just breathe. That was true. Yuan wasn't that strong yet. If Yuan was an egg, Olympus was a mountain. It would never be a fight. Not yet. I heard you were a pacifist. Yuan's voice was filled with disappointment. Were you just scared? What? Ku. The room shook. The mana in the air shook and pressed down on Yuan's shoulders. It was a considerable weight. The density of the mana and the pressure were both unusual. No matter how old he was, a high ranker was a high ranker. You're being reckless. As you may have heard, Olympus is preparing for the next gigantomachi. Whether Erpa was angry or not, Yuan continued to speak his mind. Are you going to wait for the extinction of your race? Thud, the weight of the mana increased several times over. Yuan's feet sank a foot into the ground. Erpa stared at Yuan without saying anything. It was amazing. Even though he had clearly moved an unbearable amount of mana, Yuan was holding on. That wasn't all. The mana is resisting. The mana, which should have moved as he willed it, was refusing to harm Yuan. Whether he knew it or not, Yuan continued to look into Erpa's eyes. Without any fear, without any hesitation. Goo. SS's, SSS. The threatening flow of mana that had filled the room subsided calmly. Yuan shook his shoulders. There was quite a bit of dust on his shoulders, probably because of the gravity. As I've heard, you're fearless. The tone of his voice had changed. The overbearing tone from before was gone. There was now a warmth in his clear eyes. That was Erpa's real face, without the mask. That's right, we will perish at this rate. Erpa had already heard the news through Hephaestus. Hephaestus had maintained a close relationship with the giants for a long time. Naturally, Erpa had heard about Olympus through Hephaestus. It was already a well-known fact that Olympus was preparing for the next gigantomachi. How much time do we have left? 100 years, or 10? Erpa's eyes were filled with sadness. Maybe even tomorrow. Erpa had chosen peace in order to protect his race. However, he knew that peace was not always achieved through dialogue alone. I've heard your name a lot. I've heard your name a lot from the other kids coming up from down below. Really? And Hephaestus, that kid recommended you. Yuan's eyes lit up. The conversation might be easier than he thought. As expected, Erpa was the first to say what Yuan was waiting for. You're looking for the stone of the sea, aren't you? Yes, it definitely exists. But contrary to rumors, we don't have it. It was a sudden statement. He had expected it since he had been summoned after Erpa had heard that Yuan was looking for the stone of the sea, but Erpa began to tell the story that he had been hiding until now more easily than he thought. But I know where it is. Why are you telling me that? He didn't doubt it. He had come to Erpa because he knew that Erpa knew of the existence of the divine stone of the sea. But he was curious as to why Erpa was telling him so easily. There are two reasons. It seemed that he wasn't just going to tell him for no reason. First, you're definitely not from Olympus. Of the two reasons, the first was Hephaestus's guarantee. Hephaestus himself had told Yuan that he had saved Hephaestus from the battle with Olympus and that the second gigantomachi had been significantly delayed because of it. There was nothing more certain than Yuan's relationship with Olympus. And the second is that you, Erpa's eyes looked at the quinine in Yuan's hand, are the strongest player of this era. Yuan was given a room that was excessively large for his size. Even though he was a human, Erpa was a large adult giant. With his orders, he was able to receive some hospitality. Creak, creak, Erpa was still sitting in the rocking chair with Big Wolf on his lap. It was late at night. Darkness came to the forest, and Erpa's eyes closed. He had a vivid dream. It was an extreme nightmare. Help, help, this way, hurry, I'll hold them off, so hurry and… Damn it, those damn Olympians. Og, screams and shouts filled with anger filled the sky. The smell of blood filled his nose, and the ground was already stained red. Erpa was in the middle of it all, looking at the bodies of the dead giants. Whoosh, the sea rose up. Seeing the sea wriggling as if it were alive, the giants shouted. A tidal wave, it's a tidal wave. The sea god has come. The sea god, he was one of the three gods of Olympus and a top-ranked high ranker. A huge tidal wave arose, and the giants were caught in it. Bang, bang, the power of the tidal wave crushed the giants' bodies and dragged them deep into the sea. A man with blue hair appeared above the tidal wave that had devoured countless giants. Poseidon, Erpa's eyes met Poseidon's from afar. Erpa remembered that moment clearly. He was scared. It was shameful, but that was why he couldn't do anything. Swish, Erpa's eyes opened. He didn't know how many times he had had that dream. Every time the nightmare of that time came back as a dream, he would wake up covered in cold sweat like now. Growl, Big Wolf whined. He seemed to be worried about his master's condition. It's okay, it's okay. Erpa patted Big Wolf on the back and turned his head to look out the window. For some reason, he thought a lot about that day. The giants who had fallen into the sea, a giant monster. The enemy of the giants who had single-handedly destroyed an entire battlefield. Things won't go as you wish. Urfa got up from the rocking chair in the late dawn, recalling the events of that day. Poseidon, Chapter 92. The 20th floor's management bureau was quiet. The 20th floor was a peaceful world without any special incidents or accidents. All the people at the management bureau did was go to work, process citizen complaints, eat, and spend their remaining time playing chess or Go. I thought there would be a lot of fun things to do once I became a ranker. Creak. Hall, a newly appointed ranker in the management bureau, muttered as he leaned back in his chair. The pay is still bad and the work is still boring. The pay isn't bad, and where else are you going to find a regular job? Clack. Hall's colleague across from him moved a chess piece. If it weren't for this, time would pass even more slowly. Hall leaned back in his chair and scanned the chessboard. Let's see, he thought for a moment. Bang bang. Just as he was about to move a chess piece, someone knocked on the door. What is it? Excuse me. Creak. The person who had knocked on the door opened it without waiting for a response and stepped inside. He was a man with red hair and a bad temper. Hall frowned when he saw him. Tiger. After being assigned to the management bureau on the 20th floor, there were a few faces that he saw more often than others. Most of them were one of two types. Either serious criminals or those with powerful sponsors who could come and go from the management bureau as they pleased. And Tiger was both. What? Why are you here again? Did you get into some kind of trouble? No. Then why are you here? Everyone's being careful these days because the atmosphere is so tense. In response to Hall's question, Tiger walked over to the sofa where the two men were sitting and sat down. Without asking permission, Tiger made himself comfortable and answered. I found 2 rabbits. Rabbits? Who are they? The Giants and Kim Yoo-won. What? Hall's eyes widened. The management bureau had been keeping an eye on the Giants' movements, and now Kim Yoo-won was involved. There are 2 Giants, so I guess there are 3 rabbits. Anyway, some dangerous people have met up. Then, Tiger continued with a creepy smile. Our Olympus, you see. Tiger was not yet a member of the Olympus Guild. However, he is a cadre of the Red Wolf Guild, a guild with a certain level of recognition in the middle level. In addition, there was a rumor that a fairly large figure in the Olympus Guild was backing him. So, I'd like to ask for a little support. It was not a request that could be made to the Administration Bureau. Asking for support to catch players. However, the actual reaction of Howlando Therankers from the Administration Bureau was not the problem. Even so, he's just a guy who's only climbed to the 20th floor. No, Kim Yoo-won should not be judged by his level. Judging from the way he fought in the Maureen Great War, he was no joke. Really, it seems like he let his guard down at the end, but Halgan was knocked down with a single punch. Yeah, that was pretty impressive. And it would be difficult if the 2 giants teamed up. Cheonma Shingyo might be behind them. A brief discussion about combat power. They calculated the variables of Kim Yoo-won and Cheonma Shingyo in their heads. If we definitely catch him, we'll be promoted by 1 rank. A smile crept across his lips. And so, in a small room in the Administration Bureau, a secret conversation began. Adam was no less than a small city. The pillars and extending branches reaching up to the sky were the abode of the giants. Trees that would never break or collapse. Unless it was a high ranker of Olympus 3 gods or Yo Yu Bong of the great heavenly spirit, with Yuan's current abilities he could not damage Adam. That meant, I can rampage as much as I want. Thud. Yuan climbed onto Adam's branch. The floor was solid, and the space was wide. It was more than enough to rampage, even to the point of overflowing. Whoosh, bang, bam, hundreds of fist-sized fireworks rose above Yuan's head. Roar, the fireworks blazed ferociously. The fireworks had already escaped Yuan's will. Soon, they would randomly fall below. Phew, Yuan's expression changed. Evilly sight. Wan, reads the path. Out of Wan's among abilities, the most representative one would bet the ability to read the path. There are many different paths, and the most representative one was the evasion. Where would the flames fall? By reading that path, he could figure out where to move a few beats faster than before. I'm getting dizzy. It had been quite a while since I used Wan. But even now, I still felt a little overloaded whenever I used Wan. Especially now, when I had to read a path that was difficult to avoid, it was even worse. Beep, beep, beep. My brain was starting to overload. But still, I couldn't read all hundreds of flames with this much. Sensory zone is activated. Information on all objects and living beings within a 50 meters radius is acquired. Senses are increased by 50%. Sensory zone. Of the new skills I had acquired, it was the skill I was most familiar with. Sensory zone was similar to Wan, but it was much better in terms of performance. It wasn't because it was a better skill. It was because it was a more familiar skill. I closed my eyes. Whoosh. I could feel the flames burning fiercely beyond my will. I could sense everything about which direction they would fall in, how much fierce power they possessed, and everything else. This was the power of sensory zone. Within this, my senses were activated several times over. I opened my eyes, which had been closed. At the same time, the power of sensory zone was added to my field of vision through Wan. Boom. My pupils, which had turned red, shook. Right now, I had only one impression. The world I see through my eyes can be this clear. I could clearly see where the flames floating in the sky would move and how they should move. I moved my feet. Swish. Flames began to pour down below. A downpour of sacred fire came down like rain. Without even a time interval, they poured down all at once in just 3 or 4 seconds. Bang, 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 bang. Whoosh. The flames that fell soared upward. In an instant, one side of Adam's branch blazed with purple flames. And in the middle of it, a small space opened up. Thud, thud, a small space with a diameter of less than 1 meter. In the middle of that space, where the flames, influence barely reached, I stood. Phew, everything I could see was destroyed. No, even if I closed my eyes, the result would not have been any different. After acquiring sensory zone, I had been practicing the skill steadily, but the speed at which my proficiency increased was different. After acquiring sensory field, I practiced my skills consistently, and the speed at which my proficiency increased was different. As you can see, if the opponent in front of me just smiles a little, I feel provoked and try to fight right away. As expected, the combination of the two skills is good. The two skills and the combination of the skills did not have twice the effect, but rather the effect of a square. The problem was that as the effect was good, the overload that came with it also increased. My brain can't keep up with my cognitive abilities. The expansion of the 5 senses, including vision, brought about a significant increase in brain activity. I had used sensory field a lot, but Wan was not a skill that I had used much. Up until now, I had replaced sensory field with Wan, but now I could use both skills together. In other words, the amount of brain activity had also increased. I'll need to practice. It seemed like I would be busy with this for the time being. Whoa, what? You were here? An exaggerated voice. As I turned my head, I saw a familiar face. Huh, it's a human. Why are you here? Didn't you hear? Elder Urfa told you to stay here. Elder. Well, even if it's a human. The 5 giants, including KWNT. They were all about the same size. They were about the same size as Bar and Nair, so they seemed to be young giants. Is Kim Yu-won that great? I don't know, I've only heard rumors. Even so, he's not even a ranker yet, and he's just a guy who's now on the 20th floor. Still, he seemed great when I watched the Muram competition. The giants, who had been muttering among themselves, followed KWNT and approached Yu-won. Thud, thud, no matter how young they were still giants. Furthermore, there were 5 of them. When they all approached at once, the picture was quite gruesome. And in front of them was KWNT. I see you again. It was funny, but it wasn't a very good laugh. Bar and that bastard aren't here right now, so why? A gruesome expression and size. KWNT was openly provoking Yu-won. But maybe it was because I met Urfa just yesterday. A size like Quent's now seemed cute. Hey, even so, the elder. There must be a reason why he called you. What does that matter? Quent's voice growled. Humans are all enemies. All of them. Yu-won burst out laughing. He seemed like a child who didn't listen to his teacher. Urfa would probably be like a principal to him. Are you laughing? What is this? Is it a little hurtful to your pride? They may have been big, but children were children. Looking at how they were immediately provoked and ready to fight just because their opponent, who was right before their eyes, smiled a little. You still don't understand the situation, do you? Quent threateningly reached out his hand. A palm that was much bigger than his head approached his head. Eugene reached out his hand towards Quent's hand in the same way. Swish. The two people's hands crossed. Clank. This guy, by any chance? Quent inwardly laughed at Eugene, who reached out his hand head-on and grabbed it. A mere human dares to challenge the strength of a giant. He had heard a lot about Eugene's skills. He also knew that he was the winner of the Muram competition, which proved that he was the strongest among the lower floor players, and that he was sweeping away all the rankings of the past tests. However, regardless of all that, giants had to be the best when it came to strength. It was a power of genes that was determined from birth. I'll crush it. Quant put strength into his hand that was holding on. However, creak, ack. Instead, the one who felt pain was Quant. Clickety-clack, kook. His finger bones twisted, and his bones began to break one by one. What is this? He endured the pain and put more strength into his grip, but nothing changed. Creak, clack, kya, thud. Quant, whose grip bones were twisted and broken, fell to his knees and screamed. He tried to pull out his arm somehow, but even that wasn't going his way. Hand, my hand. Quant screamed and tried to push away Eugene's hand with his other hand. Unlike his majestic appearance, he looked pathetic and shameful. What? Did Quant just lose in strength? To a human? Giants were superior to any other species on the tower in terms of strength. Of course, there were many humans who were stronger than giants depending on their stats and levels. However, most of them were rankers. Furthermore, even Quant was a player who had climbed higher floors than Eugene. Aren't there 5 of you? Adam was one of the main residences of the giants. Perhaps tens of thousands of giants lived inside here. Call all your friends. Thinking that it was perfect timing, Eugene smirked. I'll play with you more if you want. Anyway, there was plenty of time left until the test began. Chapter 93. There was a commotion on the 21st branch of Adam. There's a fight. Who's fighting? Kim Yu-won, the guest who came yesterday. A human. So, who's Kim Yu-won fighting with? Everyone. A group of young giants passed by. Bar, who had woken up late, looked around at the commotion. What? A fight? It was interesting news. Buell didn't know what happened, but he was about to move right away. If there was a fight, Bar would go there even if there was a fire. Brother. And of course, there was someone to stop Bar. Are you going to join them? Oh, no, of course not. Nyar sighed as he looked at Bar, who was smiling awkwardly. He was about to rush over without thinking because there was a fight. He's a guest of an elder. Why would you fight someone like that? That's not it. I was going to stop it. It's okay if there's only 1 or 2, but look at that. How many people are there? It's dangerous. It was an excuse he had made up on the spot, but it wasn't wrong. There were at least 10 giants just passing by in front of Nyar. That's right. Let's hurry up. Buell urged Nyar to move. He climbed the stairs, the pillars of Adam, and went up past 20 branches. Thud, a loud noise was heard in the distance. Buell, who had lived only by fighting every day, knew it. It was the sound of fists hitting fists. Wow, Bar found a group of giants gathered on a branch of Adam. Every one of them was a young giant, like Buell and Nyar. That's great. This is youth. A stage was made in a circle. Buell dug into the crowd. The young giants who found Buell made way for him. As he went inside, he saw a giant sitting down with his broken fist in his hand, and Yu-won standing in front of him. Looks like Talcare is done. I'll be your next opponent. As one giant fell, the next one stepped forward. Thud, thud. Among the giants gathered there, he was a big guy. He was a giant named Vulcan, who was about 10 years older than Buell. Talcare, finally. Yeah, you did it. Will this fight be worth watching? By the way, is that guy really human? The number of giants surrounding Yu-won in a circle was close to 100. They were all young giants like Bar, but they were still several times larger than Yu-won. But the main character who created this stage was Yu-won. The number of giants that had already collapsed seemed to be in the double digits. Yu-won sighed as he looked at the giant named Vulcan, who stepped forward in front of him. Instead of one at a time, shouldn't more of you attack me? What? Thud. The giant Vulcan, holding a large hammer, blushed. Are you ignoring me right now? I'm not ignoring you, but... Yu-won, who had been scratching his head, reached out his hand. No, it's not wrong. Crack. Vulcan felt something strange. The height difference was so great that he could barely reach Yu-won's shoulder even if he stretched out his arm. Compared to Vulcan, whose whole body was covered in muscles, Yu-won's body was so small. But for now, what was he going to do just by grabbing his shoulder? Whoosh. But then, thud, Vulcan's knee hit the ground. Vulcan, who had lost his balance in an instant, widened his eyes in surprise. What? It wasn't just that he fell to his knees. Creak, stagger. As Yu-won pressed down on his shoulder, Vulcan's upper body headed down. He couldn't even budge. The difference in strength was too great. The giant's strength is concentrated in his arms. Partial gigantification is in progress. The strength in Yu-won's arm. Vulcan tried to shake off Yu-won's hand somehow, but he couldn't. Yuan, who had instantly pinned Vulcan down with his strength, looked around. There were now over 100 giants gathered. Haven't you changed your minds yet? Yuan was saying, don't come at me one by one like this because my strength is at this level. As expected, Bar was thrilled, as he had thought. No, even more so, Yuan was strong. His blood was boiling for the first time in a long time. Following Bar, who stepped forward, Nyar stepped forward. What, you too? I think that's what that guy wants. Just think of it as treating a guest. Yuan had already spotted Bar and Nyar and was looking at the two of them. Yuan and Nyar's eyes met. And don't come alone. And come alone, right, there was no point in twisting his arm. From behind, Nyar's fist was already flying towards him. Right. That's what I thought. Thud, thud, Buwer and Nyar stepped forward. The giants around them scattered. The Bawar siblings. Wow, man, the descendants of the giants are fighting, and we're seeing it right here. Giants. The letters of the giants, all with powers reaching the high ranker level. Thirur and many left among the Jon Snow, Swasi med that Bawar and Nyar must be the descendants of the giants. They are tougher than I thought, somehow. Most of the other giants I'd meet until now seem weaker than the Setwazzablings. Evan Quant's grip strength was now Yuri's goodest worse. Bootiv still never heard of them, Bawar and Nyar, their names were nothing special either. The previous red-haired player, and the Bawar and Nyar siblings, this floor was full of capable people I'd never heard of before. Yuan's a mouth crulet and toe smile. This time, it seemed like he'd get some help. My body's been itching to move ever since yesterday. Crackle, crackle. Bawar's body began to swell. Let's see how strong that mouse give Yuan realius. Watch all you want. Whoosh. Yuan Shea's blazed red. Fiery eyes reads the path. I won't be watching for long. Through fiery eyes, Yuan could clearly see the movement of Bawar and Nyar's muscles. How their muscles moved, where they were aimed. And through that vision, Yuan's mind began to spin rapidly, and his senses began to quiver. Sensory zone is activated. Roar. His cognitive ability is expanded, and he began to feel all of the space around him like it was the palm of his hand. Bawar, who though was ready, moved first. Bam! An outstretched fist. Despite the distance, Bawar's fist grazed right over Yuan's head. With a sound like exploding air, Yuan dug into Bawar's body. Buzz. Next came Bawar's knee. Attack accurately aimed at Yuan's jaw, which was digging into Bawar's body. And in between, Yuan's free hand stepped in. Clang. Ouch. The hand that had blocked the knee began to touch. The hand that was blocking his knee tingled. Bawar glared at Wu Yun, who was dodging his fist like a loach. Pagodas were useless. Nyar's fist was already flying in from behind. I'll take it. Boom. Clang. The fist and the sword clashed. A dull thud. Nyar's fist was unscathed. Rather, it was Wu Yun's sword that was being pushed back. He's strong. Wu Yun's eyes wavered. He was stronger than he thought. It meant that it would be impossible to fight the two siblings with just his strength without using mana. Bawar's voice came from behind. Why do you think I can't even make a sound if it's my brother? Clack. Bawar struck a pose to swing his fist with all his might. He's stronger than me. Boom. There was no place to run, front or back. Bawar was sure of victory. It's over. Clang. He felt something in his fist. It was quite heavy. But it was only for a moment that he enjoyed the taste of his hand. Ha. Bawar and Nyar, their eyes met, and they looked at each other in surprise. Wu Yun had disappeared. Thud. A sound came from the sky. What the sky? Wu Yun kicked the sky and jumped up. He didn't just jump high. Thud. Wu Yun's feet kicked the void. It was as if something invisible was supporting Wu Yun's feet. Hermes' footsteps. A long time ago, it was the shoe that Hermes lost. His power dwells in it. Number 50% increase in jumping power. Jump once in the void. Once a day, you can use the skill, Skywalk. The 11th floor test, an item purchased with the merit he earned there. If the front and back were both blocked, all he had to do was jump up. He jumped higher than our height. At this speed. Nyar was just as bewildered. Swish. Wu Yun pulled out his sword and swung it with all his might, along with the force of coming down. Crack. Screech. A long scar appeared on Nyar's arm. Bawar's eyes lit up at the sight of blood spurting up. How dare you? Boom. Bawar's fist tore through the atmosphere and kicked again. The fist missed, but Bawar was not alone. This is the gap. Push him. I got it. Crash. Ignoring the wound on his arm, Nyar began to join forces with Bawar. Boom. Bang. Phew. Whoosh. It wasn't about dodging, it was about receiving it. Bawar glared at Yuan, who was moving around like an eel, avoiding the giant's fist. Even though two people were fighting together, they couldn't land a single hit. Pesky. Yuan wasn't just fast. Not only did he lower his body or step to the side, he also avoided attacks by jumping up. He wasn't sure what skill it was, but Yuan could jump one more time in the air. At first glance, it might seem like a simple skill, but from the opponent's point of view, there was no more troublesome skill than this. It's common sense that if you jump up, there's no way to dodge it. But this guy can change direction even if he jumps up. It's like he has one more direction to dodge. Not only left and right, but the number of directions he could dodge had increased, so it was impossible not to be confused as the attacker. On the other hand, Yuan had one more direction to dodge. Moreover, it doesn't seem like I can catch him at all. It was the same even though two people were ganging up on him. Yuan wasn't fighting back at all. He was just avoiding the attacks. At first, he thought it was because he didn't have enough time to fight back, but that wasn't it. It feels like I'm hitting the air. An empty space with nothing. No matter how much he reached out, he couldn't catch him, and it didn't feel like he would be able to touch him. Yuan looked at Bauer and Nyar's fists as if he knew everything. Thud, do you think I can't catch you? Wung. Mana gathered in Bauer's fist. The condensed mana shook the atmosphere as if it would explode at any moment. Oppa, Nyar shouted in surprise as he watched the excited Bauer. Even though he was excited, the flow of mana that Bauer created was unusual. Fissure. A sign of a penalty occurred on Bauer's body, who wasn't even a ranker. That meant the power Bauer was using right now was enormous. But it was too late to stop him. Eat this. With a roar, Bauer's fist shot forward. It didn't matter if he dodged it or not. Anyway, this one blow would sweep away everything in front of him. Yuan looked at the approaching fist. A fist that was approaching slowly. He could clearly see the flow of mana contained within it. I had to take it head on instead of dodging it. Chapter 94. Wung. A giant wave of mana stretched out along with his fist. Yuan briefly hesitated but did not use his mana. Wan, sensory field, Hermes' footsteps. Aside from these three abilities that he needed to practice, he had decided not to use any others during this fight. The moment he broke that rule, this fight would no longer be training but a simple brawl between children. Waak. Along with Bar's fist, the wave of mana surged forward like a giant wave. Before being engulfed by the wave, he had to find a way to break through it. Wan is reading the path. In his expanded senses. Time slowed down, getting slower and slower. The overload in his head accelerated even more, but he had more time to make judgments, and his field of vision became clearer. The flow of mana was clearly felt on his skin, and in the midst of the surging wave of mana, he saw a point where he could break through. Here, Yuan raised his sword. The point was very small. In addition, it moved along with the wave. He still had to do it. Even to pierce through this giant wave. He had to hit it. Yuan did not avoid the wave. Instead, he swung his sword with all his might. Thrusting it. Shuak, the tip of the sword was seen extending. In a split second, a question mark popped up in Bar's head. He's going to block it. He felt nothing from Yuan. It meant that he hadn't used any mana. He was simply using his strength to counter his fist. He's even more reckless than a giant. That was all he could think. In a situation where he was already ahead in terms of strength. Yuan, instead of dodging, decided to fight head-on, even though he had to forcibly increase his strength to catch him dodging here and there. It was clear who the winner would be before the collision. Oppa, Nyx exclaimed in surprise. Yuan could get seriously hurt. If that happened, he would not have the face to see Urfa. But, Wung, Bar's fist stretched out. It's too late. At that moment, Suat, a thin line was inserted into the giant wave of mana. Kugugugug. The enormous mana aura, which seemed to sweep away everything in front of it, was split apart. The thin line that had slipped into the flow of mana quickly passed by Urfa's side. What happened in the blink of an eye? He couldn't retract his outstretched fist. Urfa's eyes widened as he looked at the line approaching right in front of his nose. How on earth did he break through this enormous flow of mana? Swoosh. The line that Bar saw was Yuan's sword. Dodging the fist, he pierced through the giant wave of mana that stretched out along with the fist. The tip of Yuan's sword was now under Bar's neck. Wow, the giants around them were silent or let out small exclamations. That was all they could do right now. Nyx, who was worried that Yuan would get hurt, was just as surprised. No, rather, she couldn't help but be more surprised. After all, she was the one who had fought Yuan with Bar. What on earth happened? It all happened in the blink of an eye. Bar's blow, which took the penalty. Yuan countered it with his sword. It was an absurdly weak attack. It was definitely no different from a rock and an egg colliding. However, the result was that the rock was shattered. Swoosh. When Bar didn't move, Yuan removed the sword that had been pointed at his neck. The fight was now over. Yuan's eyes returned to their original color. His head was throbbing a little. His eyes were shaking dizzily, but the result wasn't bad. I succeeded. He had defeated Bar without using his mana. The bloodline of a demigod. And a player who had climbed to a much higher level than him. Although he was somewhat lucky, the fact that he had defeated such a Bar without using much mana or skills was a greater achievement than he had expected. I lost. Bar belatedly admitted defeat. During the time the blade was reaching his neck, he hadn't been able to react at all, so this was his complete defeat. Still, you guys are a bit better. Thanks to that, he had been able to use Wan and Sense Zone to a level where he was a bit tired. He had become somewhat accustomed to using Hermes' footsteps, but today was the first time he had used it this much. For Yuan, who had never had to face a rancor, the Boar and Nyar siblings were the perfect opponents to bring out his dulled senses. I'll be counting on you in the future too. Yuan reached out his hand. Having someone to help him train, something that he had been limited in doing alone, was definitely welcome. If possible, he wanted to receive help from Boar and Nyar. Boar's eyes flashed as he looked at Yuan's hand. Me too. Crack. He felt an unbearable amount of killing intent from the power in Boar's hand. I'll be counting on you. 10 days passed. During the past 10 days, Yuan's routine had been the same every day. Fighting. And then more fighting. The same was true for today. Buzz. Slash. Cha slash. Nyar. Ak. Nyar, who had jumped into the air, fell back down. Boom. Her large body and the force from her 2 legs shook the branch of Adam as she hit the ground. It was a power far greater than Nyar's body size would suggest. Is that the technique of the 1,000-pound hammer? All players in the tower learn martial arts on the 10th floor, to varying degrees. Nyar's technique was a technique that applied the martial arts of the Murim world. I guess you had more techniques that you hadn't shown me. Yuan's sword grazed Nyar's waist. And at that moment, I got you. Quant, the giant who had fallen to Yuan's hands 10 days ago, swung his mace down towards Yuan's back. Swish. Boom. The mace swung in vain. The mace hit the ground, and it was obvious in which direction he would have dodged. Vulcan, Darui, got it. Vulcan and Darui, who had anticipated the direction, moved together. It was almost at the same time as Yuan. Vulcan headed in the direction Yuan had jumped, and Darui kept an eye on the direction Yuan would jump once more. Boar didn't stand still either. He, like Vulcan and Darui, flew up into the air towards Yuan, who had jumped into the air. Even if they could jump again in the air, their numbers were too great. I got you. Vulcan reached out towards Yuan. Vulcan, the largest of the 5, tried to grab Yuan's waist in one breath. However, snap, snap, Yuan's figure disappeared from its spot. What the, where did he go? The 5's gazes moved to follow Yuan, who had disappeared. And then, Vulcan's ankle, who had jumped up after Yuan, was caught. Snap, buzz. Vulcan's body floated up once more in the air. Yuan, who had jumped down under Vulcan's feet without anyone noticing, had grabbed his ankle and swung him around. Awah! The giant's body became a huge weapon as it was swung around. Thud, thud, ak, cough. The swung Vulcan, Boar, and Darui collided. Nyar was barely able to get out of range. Thud. Yuan, who had jumped up, landed on the ground. At the same time, Nyar and Quant, who had been waiting below, moved. Whoosh, whoosh, mana swirled around Nyar's fist. The fist, filled with brute force, shook the atmosphere as it stretched out towards Yuan. Clack, 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 clack. The same technique as Boar's. The mana, which surged in like waves, was extremely dense. There was no place to dodge or avoid it. Behind him was Quant's mace. Yuan changed direction. The direction was towards Quant. Swish. Yuan's sword tip moved. Yuan, who had been in the center, disappeared, and Yuan's sword tip moved, slightly changing the direction of the mace. And then, clang, Yuan's sword, Quant's mace, and Nyar's fist collided together. Using my strength, Quant found himself standing next to Yuan before he knew it. It was a belated realization. Clack, kua. Quant's arm, which was hit by the elbow, was broken. Leaving Quant, who had fallen over clutching his broken arm, behind, Yuan ran towards Nyar. Boom, crash. Nyar was the most skilled out of the 5. She swung both her fists at Yuan, who was running at her from the front. Although he managed to dodge her fists that were swung out several times over a few seconds, Yuan was eventually grabbed by the scruff of the neck by Nyar. Ah! Along with a yell, Nyar lifted Yuan's body up and tried to slam him down on the floor. But something was strange. Yuan's body wouldn't budge. Thud! He was heavy, even though Yuan, who was practically a child compared to her, should have been as light as a feather, he was too heavy for her to lift. I've seen that before. Swish! In that short moment, Yuan's sword, which had closed the distance, was at Nyar's neck. Weight of 1,000 jin. Weight of 1,000 jin wasn't a special skill. It was one of the martial art techniques of the Murim where you focused your strength on one side to increase your weight. He had just seen Nyar use it and tried it out, and it worked better than he thought. Nyar loosened her grip as if she had given up and lowered her fists. The fight was over. The other giants who were lying on the floor were the same. They clicked their tongues in disappointment, or like Quant, groaned from their injuries. Nyar said as if she couldn't believe it. You can easily beat 5 people now. She didn't think that she would win, but she didn't think that the match would end this quickly. But in the end, in just a few minutes since the fight had started, all 5 of them were rolling on the floor, and she had a sword to her neck. You're completely different from 10 days ago. It was amazing. At first, he had definitely thought that 2 people would be enough. When the 2 siblings fought together, it felt like they were just a hair's breadth away from reaching him. But as time passed, the gap only grew wider. And around that time, Yuan had suggested it. Let's add one more person. Quant had volunteered. He had thought that he wouldn't be enough on his own, so he came to fight Yuan with the siblings. The result was no different. The only difference was the time, but Yuan was always the one winning. And this time was no different. It doesn't seem like you've gotten particularly stronger than before though. Yuan was always like that. It felt like he was just a bit further away, and that he could catch up if he just reached out a bit more. That was why he thought that 2 people would be enough, but after the fight was over, he would realize that wasn't the case. And it was the same when it became 3 people, and then 4 people. Are you getting used to it? There's one skill that I need to get used to. Yuan didn't deny it, and that answer made Nyar feel even more helpless. She knew that Yuan was barely using any mana. He definitely had many other skills, but Yuan didn't use them. She had wanted to make him use his skills somehow, but she hadn't been able to. Then how much stronger would he be if he fought properly? She had thought about it several times. She felt an itch to see the end of it. Let's rest for a bit and try again. Or maybe this time, we can add one more person. 6 people. This time as well, it felt like she could reach him. That was what she had said, thinking that. But the answer that came back was different from what she had expected. No, Yuan, who had sweated enough, turned around. Let's stop here. Huh, why? The test is coming up soon. Ah, it was an understandable reason. Yuan was a player who had just reached the 20th floor. He would just end up forgetting about it every time he fought because of his skills. You guys should rest well too, Yuan said as he looked at Quant, who had been hurt the most in this fight. There will be a big fight. Chapter 95. Morning came. Yuan was eating the meat of a large beast. It was a meal for everyone. Isn't it tomorrow? The test. Bar's tone was regretful. It was regretful that he had never been able to defeat Yuan, but it was also a great thing that he had grown fond of him over the past 10 days. Yeah, will you come back after it's over? Yuan thought for a moment at Bar's question and nodded. Maybe someday if I think about it. Yuan wasn't the type to make empty promises. If he ever came to the 20th floor again, he would think of this place again. He planned to visit at least once, even if it was just for a short time. Still, you're not completely heartless. You're a real jerk when you talk. Eat your food, Puck. Nyar hit Bar on the head with the meat next to him. But Bar listened to his younger brother. Nyar sighed and bowed his head to look at Yuan. I'm sorry, my brother is still immature. It's okay, he's not being malicious. I'm glad you feel that way. Drip, drip. As usual, Bar ate a lot of meat. Yuan wasn't a small eater either, but he couldn't keep up with the giant's food intake. In Vulcan's case, he was holding a skewer of meat even bigger than Yuan's and gnawing on it. As the meal was almost over, Bar asked as if he had just remembered. But didn't you say you were looking for the Stone of the Sea? It was a story that Yuan had forgotten about while he was here training with the giant players. The Stone of the Sea. In the world of the 20th floor, it was an item that was almost like a legend. Yuan had approached the giants to find that item, which he didn't even know if it really existed. Yeah, what will happen to that? After you take the test and move on to the next floor. Will you come back down? Yuan shook his head. It didn't make sense. Bar frowned and asked. Then, I'll find the stone of the sea. Before I move on to the next floor. But you just said that you're taking the test today. Bar's eyes grew wide as he spoke. If Yuan wasn't a complete idiot who forgot what he had just said, there was only one meaning to what he was saying now. By any chance, in the test, that the test on the 20th floor was related to the stone of the sea. Yuan did not answer. They would find out soon enough anyway. Do you know, Elder? Somewhat. Ha, a sigh escaped from Bar's mouth. Was it really related to us? The giants had the stone of the sea. It was an old, ridiculous rumor that had been floating around for a long time. Because of that rumor, the giants were harassed by countless players and rankers. Give us the stone of the sea. Where is it? If you know, tell us everything. If your father was one of the gods, he would have known. He just didn't tell you. Is it that important of an item? It is. Then, if the rumors are true, we should just take it. Why? You fool, Nyar sighed, looking at him with pity. What do you think it means to participate in the test tomorrow? Isn't it because the stone of the sea is related to the test? Is that it? Yuan nodded. The stone of the sea. It was also known as the sea god's stone, a fragment of the trident. That item was related to the 20th floor's test. Then why did Elder seek you out? Because I'm the strongest. Bauer's expression crumpled at the blunt answer. The same went for Quant and Vulcan, but they had nothing to say. If you looked at the limited scope of the 20th floor, Yuan was definitely the strongest player. No, maybe, he might already be close to being a ranker. Bauer looked at Yuan. The stone of the sea. 1,000 years had passed since the end of the Gigantomachy. It was a legend that had tormented the giants for all that time. Maybe the person in front of him was the one to end the legend. Elder is going too far. Ting, Quant nervously dropped the skewer he was holding onto the plate. Then you knew all this time and stayed silent. Do you know how much we suffered because of that ridiculous legend? Quant, isn't that right? How many times have I been harassed because of that outside? Heck, there were times when I almost died. Quant's voice grew louder. Why don't you just give them that damn rock? Is that treasure more important than the safety of the children? Huh. As the giants climbed the tower, they got caught up in big and small conflicts. Some people were intimidated by their large size and dared not approach them, while others who were well aware of the giants' circumstances intentionally provoked them. And half of those provocations were aimed at obtaining the stone of the sea. Quant's outcry left Bauer and Nyar speechless. Normally, the two would have defended Erpa, but this time they had nothing to say. Because what Quant said was true. In fact, when the two first met Yuan, he had been harassed by numerous players. What the hell is a pebble that you don't even know about, old man? Well done. Yuan, who had finished his meal, got up from his seat. Even though he was sitting, his eye level was higher than Quant's. Quant glared at Yuan with eyes bloodshot with anger. Well done. Yeah, you're not even one of our people, and you don't know anything, so don't talk recklessly. If that had happened, you would all be dead. Yuan turned around and spoke dismissively. It's better than extinction. What do you know about it? Bang. Quant lunged forward. Quant flew high into the air and extended his fist. However, it was an opponent that 5 people could not catch even if they attacked him all at once. Swish. Boom. Crash. Ack. Yuan grabbed Quant by the scruff of the neck and slammed him into the ground. Yuan, who had moved his hand reflexively, looked at Quant, who was lying face down on the ground, and asked. What about you? What do you know about Elder Erpa? Yuan looked at the giant children, including Quant, as if they were pathetic, and then turned around again. It's not a sin to not know, but if you don't know, you shouldn't talk nonsense. Clank, clank. Yuan, who had turned the place upside down, walked away. Bauer looked at Yuan's back and then turned his gaze to Quant, who was lying on the floor. Are you okay? Anyway, he's got brute strength. It's not just brute strength. If you're just talking about strength, I'm stronger than that guy. Okay, help me up. I think my back is broken and I don't have any strength. Pathetic kid. Bauer reached out to Quant. Quant, who had barely managed to get up with Bauer's help, groaned and looked in the direction Yuan had disappeared. That kid, I think he knows something. Don't even think about anything strange. No matter what you do, it won't work. Am I a child? You're worse than a child. But you seem to know something. You found Erfa scene, and what you just said. The words that if the ocean stone had rolled over, the giants would have become extinct. Those words lingered in the minds of the giants, including Bar. They also thought that perhaps Urfa really did know about it and hid the fact. I don't know what the elder hid from us. An unexpectedly heavy atmosphere hung over the dining table. We'll find out tomorrow. Yuan returned to his room. A room with a giant bed over 10 meters tall, a rod to hang clothes on, and a small table. It was the space where Yuan had spent the last 10 days. Thud, Yuan jumped on the bed and laid down. Because it was so big, the height of the bed was taller than Yuan's height. Stab, his head still hurt. For over 10 days, he had been suffering from the after effects of constantly using the territory and sensory field. I should hold back as much as possible until the test begins. Conditioning was essential before taking the test. Using territory and sensory field at the same time was forbidden until the test began. Wang, his right hand, which was wearing the quineth, trembled. Yuan reached out his hand towards the ceiling. The quineth was making a noise. Crackle, crackle, the quineth began to emit mana on its own. It was a phenomenon that started whenever it had the slightest opening. This damn thing. Yuan moved his mana and let it flow through his right hand. The mana that flowed in like that forcibly suppressed the mana flowing out of the quineth. Tisk, tisk, there wasn't much resistance. Fortunately, he was able to suppress the quineth right away. However, it felt like he was holding a bomb that could explode at any moment. Is it because of the piece of the trident? Trident. The symbol of the sea god, Poseidon, and his weapon. The piece of the trident was an item similar to the quineth's essence, the black stone. Perhaps it was another part of the eye that Yuan had seen earlier. The quineth has been reacting ever since I went up to the 20th floor. At first, it was once every few days, but now the intervals were getting shorter. Several reasons came to mind, but the most likely one was, are they really reacting to each other? He wasn't sure yet, but he thought it was possible. And when he first had this thought, Yuan came up with an absurd but plausible hypothesis. Maybe I can use the quine as a dowsing rod. It was a funny thought, but it wasn't entirely impossible. If the three pieces were originally one, it wouldn't be strange for them to react to each other. He wasn't sure, but there was a good chance. That's why Yuan had been practicing how to handle the quine ever since he entered the room. The absurdly large room was more than enough for him to use for training. Bam! Yuan clenched his outstretched hand. Come to think of it, the quine was complete, but he had never used it properly until now. There was no one to match him. He had practiced using it little by little, but it was clear that he had never used the item to its full potential. If this is the key to this test. For Yuan, the 20th floor test was a test to obtain the piece of the trident. If the quine was a clue to that, he needed to know how to do it a little more certainly. Yuan closed his eyes and concentrated on the quine. Open your eyes. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Black mana flowed out of the quine. This time, the quine didn't move on its own. Yuan used the quine to start infusing it with his will. Open your eyes. Yuan recalled the black wall and the unidentified yellow eyes that had surrounded him. It was the quine itself and a part of something. And an existence that wanted to reclaim a piece of the trident, a part of itself. Yuan kept searching for it. The problem was that there had been no response until now, even though the test was only 1 day away. Boom, his patience was starting to run thin. Whoosh. Yuan poured his divine power into the quine. Stop sleeping. Then, sizzle, just like when he first got the quine, a black wall began to surround Yuan. Boom. Yuan looked at the yellow eyes that appeared in front of his nose. I said, wake up. Chapter 96. The test supervisor for the 20th floor was Olympus ranker, Theseus. He was a ranker with a fairly high ranking. He also had a lot of influence within Olympus. It was thanks to his bloodline. Kim Yuan, Theseus frowned as he looked up. It was because of the order he had received from Olympus. The conditions are too picky. He had a job to do, but there were too many conditions. Don't interfere with the test directly. Don't catch the eyes of other players. Be careful of penalties. Every condition was demanding. Olympus has become more cautious these days. They must be having a hard time. We had incidents on the 1st and 11th floors, so we can't help it. Theseus looked at the Olympus ranker, Sipholeus, who had brought the news. It was a story that he knew as well. They couldn't even catch Hephaestus, and on the 11th floor, the test supervisor went out in person and got caught by the administrator. There was a lot going on. Thanks to this, Olympus was currently under special surveillance by the administrators. I have to clean up the mess those gods made. Hera asked me to tell you that she would be very grateful if you could help us. Theseus sighed. The task he had been given was not that difficult. The only problem was that it went against the laws of the tower, and if the administrator found out, it could be a really big deal this time. And secondly, something that should not have happened had already happened twice. It's not a difficult task. Theseus shook his head at the thought that immediately came to his mind. No, if it wasn't a difficult task, you wouldn't have failed twice. He was a guy who had fought with rankers since the first floor. On the 11th floor, he had won a fight against a ranker who was a test supervisor, and now, he might have grown even stronger. Kim Yu-won. Theseus decided not to think of him as a player anymore. So, who are the players who will help you this time? It would be a bit awkward for rankers to move. The Red Wolf Guild has agreed to cooperate. Red Wolf. Theseus recalled for a moment and nodded as if he had just remembered. Oh, those guys. They are rumored to be bad guys on the lower floors. They are a small guild with only 2 rankers. I heard there's a guy named Tiger there. He's on this floor right now. Really, he was the one who first brought us the news of Kim Yu-won. I think he will be of great help. That was good news. The Red Wolf Guild was a fairly useful guild. Moreover, Tiger was a player who had recently been scouted by Olympus. Leave that to the Red Wolf Guild. Tell them to move either before or after the test. And in the test, we will plant our own players, but I don't think we should expect much. I see. Are you going to move in person? Because there is a chance that the Red Wolf Guild will fail. I plan to move with some of the Administration Bureau guys. If it was someone from the Administration Bureau, they were at least rankers. Even if Theseus was the only one, he was as strong as 3 or 4 rankers, and now, he would be joined by a few more rankers. This time, it's for sure. Sipholeus bowed. Then, I will leave it to you. Get lost. Yes. Sipholeus disappeared from his seat as if he had melted away. It was not surprising since he was not real but just an illusion. Flop. Theseus sank his body deep into the sofa. He had a headache. Kim Yu-won. He had heard the name a lot. From rumors of being the strongest player to stories of being a recent headache for Olympus. He was definitely going to be a big problem in the future. He was like a poisonous weed that needed to be trampled before it grew any bigger. However, at this point in time, and probably for quite some time in the future, he couldn't become an enemy of Olympus. So Theseus's interest was not in Kim Yu-won. Theseus had only one interest. He disappeared with the giants, right? It was his father, Poseidon. It was only the stone of the sea that he was looking for. The 20th floor test was held on a small island. It was about 10 kilometers in diameter, and the island covered in seaweed was called Triton. Numerous sea monsters that had come up from the sea inhabited the island. This place is always so creepy. It gives me the creeps. Right, Oppa, you almost died to a chimera back then. I've never seen such a creepy guy. It definitely resembles the tutorial island. Did they make the tutorial island after seeing this place? Bar and Nyar, who had arrived at Triton, began to grumble. The two were in charge of guiding Yu-won on behalf of Erpa. They had come to guide Yu-won to the test site, Triton, and to protect Yu-won from any trouble that might arise. The old man worries too much. What's there to be dangerous about this guy? Bar snorted. No matter how difficult the 20th floor test was compared to the tests on the other floors, it was a test that Bar and Nyar had passed. There was no reason why Yu-won wouldn't be able to pass it. It's just a test, isn't it? Is that so? I think our rankers are also watching this test. It seems like they couldn't bring many people because it could turn into a war, but he's certainly big. Bar turned his head to look at Yu-won. Since arriving at Triton, Yu-won had been quiet the entire time. He wasn't the type to talk much even on normal days, but it was strange that he wasn't saying a single word. He seemed to be concentrating on something. The test will begin in 10 minutes. The message for the start of the test appeared. The bottom of Triton was the threshold leading to the test site. Bar and Nyar couldn't go up this far. Good luck. Ah, yeah. Bar waved his hand towards Yu-won. Good luck. Don't worry too much about me. The two of them had confidence written all over their faces. They were the two most skilled among the younger giants. The blood of the giants ran through them. There was no need to worry about the two, unless they were fighting rankers. Thud, thud, Yu-won began to climb the island. Bar and Nyar watched Yu-won's back as he moved further and further away. Right about the time Yu-won had completely left the area. Why don't you come out? Don't hide like little mice here and there. Show me your faces. Bar and Nyar looked around them sharply. There were people hiding in the seaweed. Swish, swoosh, the people in hiding revealed themselves one by one. There were quite a few of them. Bar looked around at the faces of the players who had begun to surround them. The old man was right. He recalled Erpa's words that Olympus would target Yuan. Look at these guys. They're so full of themselves, what are they talking about? They called us mice. There were about 40 of them. Some familiar faces were mixed in among them. Bar looked at the red-haired man, Horang, and smiled. Long time no see. You look a lot different than you did back then. You were the guy who was scared and trembling. Things are different now. Bang. Bar slammed his two fists together. A solid sound like steel clashing spread out into the surroundings. I'm going to fight this time. Until now, Bar had lived while holding back from fighting. It was because he couldn't bring any more shame to the giants, who had been driven to the bottom. And it was also the will of the great elder of the giants, Erpa. However, I have to fight this time. No, we have to fight this time. No. Erpa spoke. From now on we have to fight. Creak. That was the happiest news Bar had ever heard. It sounds like if we just fight, we can win. You heard correctly. Thud. Footsteps shook the ground. The players, including Tiger, turned their heads to the side. 3 more giants were approaching them. Did you harass our children? The 3 giants, including Quant. Including Bar and Nyar, a total of 5 giants had gathered in one place. The number was much smaller, but the pressure emitted by the 5 of them was by no means less than that of the 40 players. This is a bonus. Tiger smiled at the addition of the 5 giants. Olympus was quite interested in capturing the giants, so in Tiger's eyes, the 5 giants looked like big fish. Don't kill 1 or 2 of them, capture them. We might be able to use them as hostages later. The giants were also useful, but the main purpose of this mission was to kill Kim Yuan. Since they had confirmed that the giants were moving with Yuan, it was possible that they would be valuable as hostages if handled well. And Team 2, yes, follow them, take care of them before they reach the test site. I understand. Swish, puck, ack, Bar's hand instantly grabbed one of them by the neck. Before he knew it, he was standing with his back to the hill Yuan had climbed. Where are you going? Growl, goo, stew. Bar laughed as he lifted the man who was writhing in agony from the choking sensation. You have to play with me. Bang, under the island, there was a loud noise. It sounded like something heavy was falling. What is it? Is there a fight somewhere? Is it down there, outside the test site? Leave it alone. It's better for us if the test participants fight among themselves. Right, the fight between the players wasn't that serious. Especially, around the 20th floor, fights of a certain scale often broke out. Moreover, they were currently in a situation where the test was about to begin. The test participants either didn't care about the fight below, or even if they did, they just ignored it. They're being noisy. Theseus's expression twitched slightly. He had clearly told them to take care of it quietly. Fortunately, there's no one interested. It was almost time to start the test. The fact that Kim Yuan had not appeared yet meant that the Red Fox Guild had captured him. For the time being, the primary objective had been achieved. Still, they're quite useful. In the first place, he didn't think the Red Fox Guild would be able to deal with Kim Yuan. It would be nice if they could, but Kim Yuan had already defeated a ranker on the 11th floor, so it was difficult to expect. Their role was nothing more than buying time. The Red Fox Guild had done their part by preventing Yuan from participating in the test. Turn the errand boy's eyes to the test site and take care of Kim Yuan. Theseus checked the time through his player kit. Less than 3 minutes were left until midnight, the start of the test. Click, time passed, and the start time of the test was almost upon them. It was then, I'm sorry, a message arrived on Theseus's player kit. The executive of the Red Fox Guild who was fighting down below. It was Tiger's message. We lost Kim Yuan. Lost. Theseus hurriedly scanned the participants. He looked for Kim Yuan's known face. There were about 100 participants, a large number, but it wasn't a number that couldn't be quickly scanned. But, he's not here. Yuan, who had clearly come up here, was nowhere to be seen. Where did he go? Chapter 97. Swoosh. The small waves crashed against the cliff, shattering into countless water droplets. Yuan was standing on that cliff. Sitting at the edge of the island like that, he looked down. It's almost time. Yuan checked the time and got up. It wasn't the place where the test would begin, but it didn't matter. In any case, Yuan was within the range of the test site. He hadn't heard the explanation properly, but he still remembered the contents of the 20th floor test. The 20th floor test will begin. On the small island, Triton, there are many sea monsters that have come up from the sea. Within 12 hours, defeat the monsters and obtain the heart of the sea. Additional achievements will be earned depending on the number of hearts of the sea obtained. The basic structure of the 20th floor test was similar to the 11th floor test. The only difference was that the flag had been replaced with a small stone called the Heart of the Sea. The other differences were that the stage was an island, the difficulty of the monsters, and that it was a solo competition. However, even with those slight differences, the content of the test changed completely. The 20th floor was a turning point for the players. It's also where the team-based tests begin in earnest. The monsters inhabiting the island were too strong for a 20th floor player to catch. At least 4 to 5 players had to join forces to catch just one. Because of that, the players had no choice but to form teams, whether they liked it or not. In addition to that, unlike the 11th floor test, there is no limit to the number of people who can pass this test. In other words, there was no reason to take sides in the 20th floor test. That's how the players started forming teams. And they realized that it was easier to be with many people than alone, so they started forming teams in earnest. This was why the 20th floor was known as a turning point for the players. It was also the reason why many players gathered in one place when the test began. But, I feel a little sorry for those guys. Yuan had no intention of complying with this test. Swish, his body slowly leaned forward. Crash. A stronger wave hit the cliff. His tilted body slowly fell down beneath the wave. Yuan closed his eyes. Everyone except me will fall. Swish. Over there. Everyone, step back. Next group, go. Just hold on a little longer. No, we're ready. Everyone, get out. Splash, boom, kya. Hunting began all over the island. The players participating in the test usually formed teams of 8 to 15 people. Players hunting sea serpents. Theseus watched them through the screen on his player kit. Kim Yuan, haven't you found him yet? We're looking. You haven't found him. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing and go look for him. Get more people. Yes, sir. The test assistants moved according to Theseus' orders. No matter how strong Olympus was, a ranker not related to the test site could not enter at will. Fortunately, there were quite a few rankers with scouting skills among the rankers under Theseus. But, is it possible that you can't find one person on this tiny island? It had been hours since the test began. They still hadn't been able to find Yuan. He wouldn't be able to do anything during the test anyway, but he couldn't shake the thought that the plan was already going wrong. Did he run away? It wasn't impossible. Kim Yuan would know that he was an enemy of Olympus. It wouldn't be strange if he had noticed the Red Wolves Guild's attack before the test began and escaped. But is he that kind of guy? Theseus didn't know much about Kim Yuan. However, there were more than a few things that made him hesitate to conclude that he had simply run away. Kim Yuan has joined the Giants. He had heard that Kim Yuan and the Giants had made contact from the Red Wolves Guild. Thanks to that, he was able to find out that Kim Yuan would be participating in this test and was able to set a trap in advance. However, the story he heard today was something that couldn't be explained, even if Kim Yuan had helped a few giant children. Why? No, how? The Giants' hatred for humans was deep. The Giants' hatred for humans runs deep. Although they may have recognized you on the 20th floor, they want you to catch Kim Yuan with a team of 15 people. It was because of what humans did to the Giants during the Gigantomachy. Half of the Giants died in that war, and the Giants have been hostile to humans ever since. Fortunately, the Giants, worried about the second Gigantomachy, kept their hatred to themselves and did not show it outwardly. It was definitely strange that Kim Yuan had joined the Giants. After the Gigantomachy, the relationship between Giants and humans had completely changed. Could it be? A sudden thought flashed through his mind. The Giants are hiding the sea stone. Those were the words of Theseus' father, Poseidon. Zeus has ordered us to avoid war with the Giants until the next Gigantomachy, but that doesn't mean we can do nothing. Poseidon's obsession with the sea stone was immense. He was willing to disobey the orders of Zeus, the king of Olympus, to get it. Find the stone while you are the exam supervisor. If you do, I will acknowledge you as my son. For Theseus, an illegitimate child, it was the sweetest offer. Poseidon, one of the 3 gods of Olympus. For him to acknowledge him as his son meant that he would become the true successor of the sea god. Father can't have the wrong information. It's clear that the Giants have the sea stone. That's why Theseus focused more on capturing the Giants than Kim Yuan in this exam. Kim Yuan didn't matter. He just needed to find the sea stone. That's what he thought, but is Kim Yuan involved too? A human moving with the Giants. And the Giants starting to come out of the forest. The picture he had drawn at first was erased, and a new one was drawn over it. but he still couldn't see what the picture was. But then, cuckoo, cuckoo cuckoo, the ground began to shake slightly, as if an earthquake had occurred. At that moment, countless pieces of information flashed through Theseus' mind. Was this it? The corners of Theseus' mouth turned up. Why hadn't he been able to find the stone despite searching for so long? Where on earth was it? Did the giants really have it? If so, why didn't they use it in the Gigantomachi? The answer was here. Tick. Theseus took out his player kit and contacted someone. He wasn't even face to face, but out of old habit, he stood up and folded his hands politely. A moment later, Theseus bowed his head to the player kit. It's been a long time since I've greeted you. Wang. The screen lit up. It was a face he hadn't seen in a long time. Theseus, voice naturally trembled. I think I've found it. Theseus, eyes filled with strength as he raised his head. Father. The 20th floor exam was proceeding smoothly. As usual, the players hunted sea monsters and steadily collected hearts. Already, nearly half of the players had acquired the original goal, the heart of the sea. Thud. Another sea serpent fell. A team member who was searching the serpent's body shouted. I found it. In his hand, he held a transparent gem that glowed blue. It was the heart of the sea, the condition for passing the exam. Did we get another one? This is easy, easy. How many is this? 15. We have them all, then. The number of team members was 15. It matched the number of hearts of the sea they had collected so far. The player leading the team, Assel, checked the remaining time. 6 hours 18 minutes and 21 seconds. There was still more than half of the time left. At this rate, they would probably be able to acquire at least one more heart per person and aim for the additional reward. Not bad. They had been a team since the 10th floor. Their teamwork was good, and their individual skills were also excellent. It couldn't be helped. They were all players sponsored by Olympus. Passing the exam is already certain. Assel looked around. Wing. From the start of the exam until now, he had kept an eye on the top of the island. The person he was looking for with his search skill was one person. It was Kim Yu-won. Where did he go? Finding and eliminating Kim Yu-won. That was the order from Olympus. Of course, it was impossible. It was impossible, of course. No matter how well they knew the 20th floor, it was impossible to catch Kim Yu-won with a team of 15. Well, it's good for us if he doesn't show up. We'll hear about it later. But it was much better for them if they kept searching for him and Kim Yu-won didn't show up. The team members, who had been catching sea serpents and catching their breath for a while, started chatting as they got bored. Arkyle watched them and got up from his seat. Have you all rested enough? Yes, we're all rested. Shall we move now? Since there were no casualties, everyone was motivated. They had already passed the test, so they couldn't help but be motivated. Arkyle nodded. The team members got up from their seats one by one. Then from now on, let's split the group in two. That was when, pow, swoosh, water erupted from the bottom of the cliff. The team members reacted quickly. Something's coming. Get ready. What the heck, again? Is it a sea serpent? No, it's much smaller than that. The something that emerged with the seawater was too small to be considered a monster appearing on the island. No matter how small it was comparable to a monster of 3 to 4 meters, but compared to a sea serpent that was dozens of meters long, it was no different from an ordinary person. No, really it's a person. The person who came up from the sea soon landed safely on the ground. He was a man with wet hair like seaweed and a red outfit. Who is it? It was hard to tell who it was because he looked like a drowned rat. Above all, his wet hair was slicked forward, so his face was not visible. He's not a monster, but he looks like a player. Why is he in the sea? Arkyle's eyes flashed. Come to think of it, it was strange. The bottom of the sea below the island was a dangerous area teeming with monsters. It was a place where monsters like the sea serpent, that over 10 team members had just hunted together were swarming. Furthermore, players couldn't hunt easily in the sea because of its nature. Of course, at this moment, Arkyle couldn't help but think of one person. No way. The face that had been hidden by his hair gradually appeared. His hair looked different because it was wet, but his face was clearly remembered. Kim Yu-won. Kim Yu-won. Why is he suddenly in the sea? The team members were just as bewildered by Yu-won's sudden appearance. That was when Yu-won opened his mouth. Olympus. Creepy. Arkyle felt a chill down his spine for a moment. How did he know their affiliation? It was the right question, but he couldn't answer it. That was the case not only for Arkyle but also for all the team members present. Everyone kept their mouths shut and remained silent. The moment they answered, they felt their lives were in danger, as if their necks would snap. Frozen figures. Yu-won turned his back on the 10 or so Olympus players. Don't be scared, I'm not going to fight. Quote. What does that mean? Is he going to let us go? Surely Yu-won was said to be on bad terms with Olympus. But should we really take this as him not willing to fight, even showing us his back? It was fortunate that he just passed by. However, Arkyle couldn't just welcome it. But if we just run away from here, perhaps he would be punished by Theseus, the test supervisor of the 20th floor. Perhaps all support from Olympus would be cut off from this moment. That was when Yu-won continued. Anyway, I'll have to fight soon, even if I don't want to. What are you talking about? Rumble, rumble. The ground began to shake. Arkyle felt something strange. Right after that, swoosh, something began to rise from below the island, above the vast sea that stretched endlessly. It was something I had seen many times. Sea serpent. With a body length of over 10 meters, a monster that lived in the sea. It was the sea serpent, the most common monster on the 20th floor. But, what the, swoosh, swoosh hhh. Arkyle's jaw dropped at the sight that began to unfold before his eyes. How many are there? Chapter 98. Before he knew it, Arkyle began counting the number of sea serpents appearing before his eyes. 10, 11, 12. After counting to about 20, he gave up counting. It was meaningless, even a rough estimate would put their numbers in the hundreds. No, it's much more than that. Furthermore, it wasn't just sea serpents. Land bears, sea bears, ichthyosaurs, and numerous other types of monsters were gathering towards the island. Just how many were there? Hundreds, thousands, or maybe tens of thousands. Kim Yu-won isn't the problem. This test was completely ruined. No matter how strong Kim Yu-won was, there was no way he could handle that many monsters. It was impossible, even for a ranker. Well, maybe not for a high ranker, but for now, the best course of action was to run away. Everyone, run outside the island. If they left the testing grounds before the time limit was over, they would automatically fail the test. But this wasn't the time to worry about that. First, they had to survive. And it seemed like the other team members were thinking the same thing. Outside the island, supervisor, where's the supervisor? Shouldn't he be appearing now? Something's wrong with this test. To survive, the players started to run like crazy. The test was ruined. They no longer thought the test had any meaning and looked for the test supervisor. As rankers, they thought he would somehow be able to protect them from this situation. However, no, Yu-won was surprisingly calm, even while looking at this situation. It's not wrong. After confirming that all of his teammates had moved and was about to leave his spot, Arkyle could hear Yu-won's words. What? It's just getting fixed now. Rumble, rumble. Once again, the ground shook. No, the island. Yu-won was looking down below. To its original form. It didn't make sense, but Arkyle instinctively realized it. Yu-won was at the center of this situation that was happening now. And only after hearing Yu-won's words was Arkyle able to listen to the system. The test is being reorganized. Reorganized. This was something he had never experienced or heard of before. The test isn't ruined. The structure of the test was changing. This was why the test supervisor wasn't intervening. There was another reason why the test supervisor did not intervene. The giants nodded at Nyar's words. Unless there was a special error, and unless someone other than the players intervened in the test supervisor would not appear. Then this is. He took out the blue jewel he had put in his pocket. The blue glowing jewel was like a token that would allow him to pass this test. However, if the test was reorganized, this would be nothing more than a pretty stone rolling on the floor. No, that's not important now. Think later. For now, he just had to survive. Arkyle hurriedly turned around and left his seat. As he watched him run towards the bottom of the island, Wu-won muttered. You don't have to do that. The test had now been completely turned upside down. This meant that the first task had been solved. Now, then. Pachigigg. A black light began to pour out of the quintet. Now the question is how long we can hold out against those things. Ouch, ouch. Kwon grimaced as he applied medicine to his shoulder wound. In response, Bar, who was applying the medicine, slapped his arm with his palm in annoyance. Smack. Why did you come here when your arm isn't even healed? You're talking big for someone who would have died if it weren't for us. We would have won even without you. Brother. Nyar, who had been listening to the two, shook his head. That's not true. Bar, who had been prideful, turned his head away, looking embarrassed. Around them were the corpses of the Red Wolf Guild players. The tiger leading them had run away, and Quan and Vulcan were injured. That kid was strong. I don't know his name, but he was the one with the red hair. If Nyar hadn't taken care of him, things would have gone terribly wrong. I would have been overwhelmed on my own. But fortunately, you guys finished off the other enemies early and joined me. I wouldn't have been able to hold out much longer. Even within the Red Wolf Guild, the tiger's skills were overwhelming. If the other players had been just a little more numerous, and if the tiger had been just a little more skilled, they would have been the ones to lose. Goo, that was when the island began to shake. All the giants present had been players who had taken the 20th floor test and moved up, but this situation had never occurred. This test is strange after all. Nuar's words made the giants nod their heads. It was definitely strange. In the first place, it was not a normal situation for a guild to move to hunt down a single player. Furthermore, as if he had foreseen this situation, Erpa had sent them to this place. Hurry up and go help U1. And now, as U1 takes the test, the island begins to change little by little. Maybe it really is. Splash, splash. Nuar could see hundreds and thousands of sea serpents beginning to appear in the distance, from the sea. You may have found it. Kya, the monsters that lived in the sea roared. What was contained in it was not something like fierce anger or a desire for food. A longing for something, or it was closer to a cheer. Yes, that's right, thud. Nuar turned his head at the familiar voice. The tiger that had lost the fight a long time ago and ran away had returned. This time, it seems like you've really found it. The tiger's expression was different from before. He looked much more greedy and much more confident. The one who possesses the stone of the sea will have the power of a god. Behind the tiger, dozens more players gathered again. The sea god of Olympus is looking for the stone of the sea. What's there to be afraid of? In the end, are you saying that we should just do the dirty work of Olympus? So what? Right now, it's the middle of the exam. It wouldn't be good to cause too much trouble here, would it? That's something to think about later. The tiger's eyes, which had seized the opportunity, could no longer see anything else. And the same was true of the other Red Wolf Guild players who had come with him. Did you really come back this time because you wanted to die? Nuar was the first to step forward. It was the tiger that had already tried his hand at her. No matter how many there were, the 5 giants were a difficult opponent for the Red Wolf Guild players to handle. But this time it was different. I'm sorry, but my opponent is not you. The tiger took a step back. At the same time, he bowed his head to the man standing next to him. Please, clack, a man with half of his face covered by a mask stepped forward. It was an ominous atmosphere. Nuar's instincts warned him. That guy is dangerous. Even rankers are getting involved. The aura he felt was not that of an ordinary player. Just by looking at how even Tiger, one of the top players among players, used honorifics when addressing him, you could tell. That bastard was right. Quant, who was sitting in the back while supporting his injured arm, grinned. This fight is going to get really big. Thud, one side of the island shook. It was different from the shaking just before. That was the sound of something heavy falling. Thud, thud. The sound was heard repeatedly from the surroundings. The players of the Red Wolf Guild, including Tiger, turned their gazes around with stiff expressions. Gee, giants, what the hell is that size? Rankers. Giants with monstrous gazes that were well over 4 meters in size. The giants, rankers of the giant race, appeared on the island. We have come by the Elder's orders. Thud, the giant ranker, Surtur's 21st son, Sutar, led the giants. From now on, we will support the player Kim Yu-1. It has begun. Through the magic eye, Yu-1 watched the battle taking place under the island. The distance was quite far, but thanks to the enormous size of the giants, it was not difficult to see the situation with the naked eye. The fact that Sutar has moved means that he is betting that strongly. Urfa was the only one who knew where the sea god's stone was hidden. In addition, he was the giant who had experienced Poseidon's power most deeply in the history of Gigantomachy. Of course, there was no way he would want to hand over the sea god's stone to Olympus. Olympus must have noticed by now. Olympus had been searching for the sea god's stone for a really long time. Zeus had told them to avoid clashing with the giants, but only Poseidon had tried to find the sea god's stone through the giants while exerting his influence on the 20th floor. That was how they came to know that the sea god's stone was hidden on this small island, Triton. The reason they had not been able to get their hands on the sea god's stone was because Triton was a stage set up by the administrator for the test. Olympus couldn't have missed the change in the test. Theseus must be feeling anxious by now. The trap that started with the intention of capturing just one player now had the treasure of the Seal of the Sea on the line. And note that even the giant shad started to move. They must have been quite sure of something. You guys have a really strong sense of smell. Kya. Yuan Batasia serpents that had come right in front of his face. Don't you agree, Zook? The sea serpent's mouth opened. The smell of the sea wafted out of its mouth. At that moment, Yuan's sword moved. Skek. The head of the sea serpent was cut off. Jajoa. Blood spouted out of the severed head. Yuan flicked the blood off his sword and mumbled. What answer did you expect? Numerous sea monsters, including the sea serpent, came up onto the island. Some of them ran toward Yuan. Of course, not all of them were doing that. Kururoru. Kya. Kakuk. Most of the monsters wandered around the island, sniffing and turning their heads. They were looking for something. Shuaik. Check. Yuan cut down the monsters that were rushing in. He kept cutting and cutting like repeat. The monsters kept pushing forward in a disgusting manner. When is it going to move? There was no way he could leave the island. If he did, no player left in the testing ground would survive, and the test would naturally be voided. From that moment on, this stage would no longer belong to him. He endured like that for a few minutes. Creak, he felt a slight movement from the ground. It had already started moving a while ago, but it seemed to have taken a long time to wake up from its sleep. This sleepyhead, the corners of Yuan's mouth went up. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. The monsters that had been causing a ruckus stopped moving. They looked at one spot and howled as if possessed by something. Goo 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 goo. The end of the island was rising. Yuan looked at the head that was revealed at the end of it. Boo! A great roar. Thud, 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 thud. At the same time, the surface of the island split open, and a black, hard shell appeared from beneath it. The head that lifted its head open at its mouth, which had been firmly shut for a long time. Yuyu, sea turtle, has appeared. The body of sea turtle is designated as the test site. Defeat the sea turtle and obtain the sea stone. Chapter 99. To wake the sea turtle, you have to aim for its stomach, not its back. Erpa told Yuan how to obtain the sea god stone. It's back, that means there's no way from the island. The sea turtle's back shell is hard enough that even some high rankers would have difficulty breaking it. We have to go into the ocean to aim for its stomach. Yes, it's like a suicide mission. In the world of the 20th floor, the ocean was like the largest dungeon in the tower. Countless monsters lived within it. The ocean in this world was a place where there were more monsters than fish. And yet, he was telling him to go into that ocean. And it was something that a player who wasn't even a ranker had to do. Can you do it? I can. Erpa smiled at his answer that didn't hesitate at all. He couldn't help but believe him when he answered like that. There is a pattern engraved on the bottom of the sea turtle that combines a star and a sun. That is the sea turtle's seal, and it's the reason why the sea turtle has remained on the island until now. If we erase that, the test will begin. Yes. Erpa's expression became serious. The moment the sea turtle reveals itself, the difficulty of the test will change completely. Yuan nodded his head. It was obvious. From that point on, the reward will become the stone of the sea. Yes, and when that happens, the difficulty will be beyond ordinary. It might tell us to catch the sea turtle. It was a joke, but it was completely possible. The tests in the tower were basically rewards based on difficulty. The higher the difficulty of the test, the more valuable the reward given. And that meant that the tests with guaranteed great rewards also had high difficulties. And the sea god stone was an item that was worth that much. And from then on, Olympus will no longer be able to interfere with the test. It will no longer be a test that they are hosting, but a test that is hosted by the administrator. Won't they try to take it after the test is over? They won't just leave it alone. It was the answer he had been waiting for. Erpa clenched his fist. He had lived his life being known as a pacifist within the giants, but that was only for the sake of the giants. And Erpa could fight, even burn his own body, for the sake of the giants. That's good to hear. Yuan nodded his head in satisfaction after hearing a definite answer. He had secured the help of Erpa and the giants. Erpa would definitely keep this promise, as he didn't want the sea god's stone to fall into Poseidon's hands. But there was one question left. Until now, Yuan had only known that Erpa had the key to the test, but he didn't know how he had that information. How do you know such things? I was the one who raised that turtle. Erpa's eyes reminisced about the distant past. I was also the one who revived the turtle that had swallowed the stone. You do not meet the requirements and will be forcibly removed from the testing grounds. It was a message that everyone on the island heard. The giant ranker, Sutar, looked around at the suddenly changed scenery. In the distance, he could see Triton, the island that had been the stage for the test. No, it was no longer an island. Yuawa, with one cry, a hole was pierced through the clouds floating in the sky. It was a gigantic being with a diameter of almost 10 kilometers. Sutar felt his shoulders grow heavy from the presence that was radiating from it. There was only one turtle that Sutar knew of that was that big. The sea turtle. It was one of the greatest beings in this ocean. It was also known as the turtle that failed to become a black tortoise, and was known as the ruler of the world of the 20th floor. However, was it that big? Sea turtles were originally large. The large ones were almost 1 kilometer in diameter, and the hardness of their shells could even partially defend against the attacks of rankers. It was definitely a terrible monster to think of it as something that appeared on the 20th floor. However, even so, that thing was huge, too huge. It must be because of the sea stone. Sutar raised his head and looked at the blue-haired man. The man who had come flying on a large bird was someone even Sutar knew well. It's been a long time, Sutar. We're not exactly on friendly terms to be greeting each other like this, Theseus. Sutar and Theseus. The two of them had fought in the Gigantomachia a long time ago. I heard you became a test supervisor and have been living a leisurely life, so why are you here? Shouldn't you be managing the test site? It's because it's so noisy outside. What about you guys? What's all this commotion with the giants near the test site? Our kids were being harassed by the rankers over there, so we helped them out a little. Is there a problem? At Sutar's reply, Theseus' gaze turned to the players of the Red Moon Guild. Among them, he could see Mukrang, the sub-guild master of the Red Moon Guild. He had recently become a ranker and joined the Red Moon Guild, and with his participation, the giants had gained a just cause. There's no problem. All the giants had done so far was defend themselves. There was no reason to attack them. After thinking for a while, this was all he could say. However, I forbid any more commotion. This is a test right now, Sutar. The corners of Sutar's mouth turned up. You're the ones who would throw away something like that first if it was convenient for you. I have no intention of avoiding it if you want to fight. But keep this in mind. Schwa, at Theseus' will, the surrounding sea stirred. No one, absolutely no one, is allowed to interfere with the test. No matter who. Theseus, vigilance deepened. Several rankers appeared around him. They were probably the supervisors who were helping to manage the test. Sutar looked back and forth between the giant rankers and the test supervisors. The test was not over yet. Theseus, the test supervisor, could not afford to do anything reckless while the test was in progress. It would be too much of a burden for Olympus, who had to watch over the administrators. And the same went for the giants. Touching a test supervisor while the test was in progress was no different from directly challenging the authority of the administrator. Neither side can interfere with the test or make the first move. Sutar's gaze moved to the sea turtle, which was waking up and roaring. Now all that's left is for that guy to pass the test safely. Defeat the sea turtle to obtain the sea stone. Yuan once again reviewed the contents of the test. It was a ridiculous test. The sea turtle was a monster that even rankers found difficult to hunt. Furthermore, this one was hundreds of times larger than a normal sea turtle. No wonder it was mistaken for a small island. Did the sea stone make it this big? It doesn't seem like a normal mutation. Having entered the sea turtle's mouth, Yuan slowly began to find his way. It was impossible to catch the sea turtle as the message instructed. No matter how he calculated it, the answer didn't add up. It was ridiculous to think of piercing the shell of a sea turtle of this size, and it was not easy to pierce its skin either. There was only one answer. To get inside the sea turtle. And find the sea stone inside. The purpose of the test was to defeat the sea turtle and obtain the sea stone. Yuan interpreted the contents of the test in reverse. If I get the sea stone, I can defeat the sea turtle. When he thought about it this far, Yuan thought that the test wouldn't be that difficult. Even though it was large, all he had to do was find the sea stone. When it came to treasure hunting, Yuan had a pretty good treasure map. But there was a problem. Kya, a small dragon with blue scales lunged at Yuan. A sea serpent. It was a monster that ranked high among the monsters that inhabited the sea, and it was a creature with considerable strength and size. Clang, creak. Yuan stood on the sea turtle's tongue and blocked the sea serpent's teeth with his sword. Yuan wasn't the only one who had entered the turtle's body. Warrioric. Divine flames covered Yuan's sword. Yuan no longer saved his mana. There was no need to any more after entering the turtle's body. Your HP recovery rate has increased due to the influence of darkness. HP recovery rate, plus 112%. Your MP recovery rate has increased due to the influence of darkness. MP recovery rate, plus 56%. Your MP amplification rate has increased due to the influence of darkness. MP amplification rate, plus 56%. The inside of the turtle's body was pitch black without a single light. The mana recovery rate, amplification rate, and the sword's influence had all increased significantly. Additionally, KWAGGGG. Black mana shot out from the Quinn. Kwang, the body of a sea dragon that had charged towards Yu-1 was torn to shreds. Thud, thud thud, the flesh of the sea dragon fell to the floor. Yu-1 kicked off the ground again to avoid getting covered in blood and used wand to brighten his vision in the darkness. There sure are a lot of them. There wasn't just one sea dragon. There were at least 15 to 16 mixed in with the countless monsters. Out of the large number of monsters, only a few were aware of Yu-1. Most of them entered the turtle's mouth and were being swallowed into its throat. Are they voluntarily trying to be food? The sea god's stone's influence was much stronger than he had thought. It was strong enough to make the monsters living in the sea give up their own lives. Yu-1 suddenly recalled a story that had been passed down as a legend in the 20th floor world. Those who find the stone of the sea will become the god of the sea. It wasn't just a simple legend. Right now, at this moment, the turtle was no different from a god of the sea. Ooh, the turtle's cries filled its mouth. The sound was enough to make his eardrums burst. It's too noisy to stay here. Yu-1 took a step further inside. The inside of the turtle's body felt like the bottom of the dark sea. The smell of the sea stung his nose, and countless monsters that lived in the sea swam around the turtle's body as if it was their new home. The monsters that had entered from outside. On top of that, are these guys who were living inside here from the beginning? It seemed like the inside of the turtle's body had been used as a dungeon for quite some time. The number of monsters that had been pushed in from the outside was significant, but there were also a considerable number of monsters that had already formed an ecosystem and were living inside. Shwa! Seawater entered through the turtle's mouth. It seemed like it was pretty thirsty. Chakback! The floor was soaked with seawater. A black swarm blocked Yu-1's view as he walked. Kururung, Kiao, the monsters that were living inside the turtle's body and the monsters that had voluntarily become the turtle's food. They had now become the turtle's arms and legs. Is this as far as I can go? Wung, the Quinn let out a small cry. The black stone equipped on the Quinn reacted to the sea god's stone. Yu-1 could vaguely feel the location of the sea god's stone in the turtle's vast body. And now, the monsters were blocking Yu-1's path to the sea god's stone. Am I a virus or something? Yu-1 was the only one inside who wasn't affected by the sea god's stone. The turtle had already recognized Yu-1 as a virus. Chiolbek, Yu-1 didn't stop walking. There was only one way anyway, and even if he ran away from here, he would have to go that way eventually. No backing down, he didn't need to save his HP and mana anymore. Pajijijik, the gauntlet equipped on his right hand. The Quinn emitted a black light. Breakthrough. Kwang, Chapter 100. Theseus was the test administrator for the 20th floor. Test administrators had various authorities regarding tests. They could intervene in the test to a certain extent as long as it didn't violate the rules, and they could also observe the progress of the test in detail. However, he had lost most of those authorities now. Still, there was one thing he could know. The body of the sea turtle will be designated as the test site. Defeat the sea turtle to obtain the stone of the sea. It was the content of the test. Even if he wasn't a player participating in the test, as a test administrator who had been granted authority by the administrator, he could at least know the subject of the test. Do you trust that guy? After a long standoff, Theseus spoke first. Sutar didn't answer. However, Theseus didn't need to hear an answer from him to know what the giant was thinking. You're expecting that guy to pass the test and bring the stone, aren't you? Shut up. You seem to be gambling. What are you going to do if you fail? The giant, who had been silent, began to move. Now that Olympus knew about this, the times would change in some way. Perhaps the second Gigantomachi would be brought forward. Of course, even the giants didn't know about that fact. He will succeed. Sutar looked up and looked at the sea turtle, who was yawning. Because the elder has decided so. Blind faith in Urfa. Sutar was here now with only that faith. The other giants were the same. The 10 giant rankers who had followed Sutar. They were all thinking the same thing. Theseus smiled as he waited for the test to end. Ignorant giants. He had heard that Yu-1 had defeated a ranker. However, even Yuan wouldn't be able to pass this test. Thousands and tens of thousands of monsters were inside the sea turtle's body. And the sea turtle, it would be impossible to defeat the main body. The test will definitely fail. Theseus didn't doubt it. The test was already out of his hands anyway. All he could do now was wait here vaguely. When that time comes, Theseus gripped his trident tightly and slowly. I will wipe out the giants and get my hands on the stone of the sea. Kwagggjik. Bang, the bodies of the sea serpents were torn to pieces, and the fragments were scattered everywhere. Having opened up a path once, Yuan increased his speed again. He didn't have the leeway to deal with all the monsters that were chasing him. Kia-o, the cry of a sea dragon was heard right behind him. The smell of the sea became stronger. Yuan gripped Quina tightly in his cold hand. Stealth is activated. Swoosh. Yuan's figure disappeared from that spot in an instant. Quina's ability to erase his appearance and presence. Although he couldn't perform absolute stealth like Hades due to the different process of creating Quina and Yuan's abilities, he could hide his body for a short time. Ji-Rook, the sea dragon that had been charging towards Yuan hesitated for a moment. It had clearly intended to swallow Yuan's body in one gulp, but its target had suddenly disappeared. Sniff. The sea dragon sniffed. It had a sense of smell that had been cultivated in the salty and bloody sea. As soon as its nose was stimulated, it was able to find Yuan's location. However, Kwaggik. That brief moment of confusion was enough to end the sea dragon's life. Yuan's knee slammed down on the sea dragon's neck. The sea dragon's neck snapped, and its body fell limply to the floor. Yuan stepped on the sea dragon's corpse and jumped up. Pot, kya, countless sea serpents writhed around. Yuan looked at the sea serpents below him and drew mana into his sword. War-Ru-Rook, Holy Fire, Quina, Pa-G-G-G. Quina and Holy Fire exploded together, burning the bodies of the sea serpents that had opened their mouths below. The explosion of Quina and the Holy Fire burned the bodies of the sea serpents that were gaping from below. Since I'm concentrating on my vision, the prediction of Yuan's battle will inevitably become weaker than usual. In such a case, it's better to give up vision. Completion rate of Cheonsalsung increased by 0.001%. Completion rate of Cheonsalsung does not increase. Completion rate of Cheonsalsung increased by 0.001%. Cheonsalsung, which had reached a certain level of completion, was no longer increasing its completion rate. It was regrettable. Completion rate, 99.041%. I thought I might see the completion of Cheonsalsung in this exam. I guess that would be difficult. Pop. Yuan stepped on the void again. The effect of Hermes' footsteps. Yuan lightly jumped over a sea serpent and swung his sword at the next opponent. Scratch. I'll ignore those who can be ignored. There was no reason to risk his neck for hunting. That wasn't the purpose of this exam in the first place. Swipe. Yuan concentrated on the energy flowing out of Quina. Quite a distance away, Quina and the sea god's stone reacted to each other. It was so subtle that he wouldn't notice it if he didn't concentrate, but it wasn't difficult to roughly determine the direction. Thump. He could feel his heartbeat through Quina. He seemed to know where the sea god's stone was. Is it embedded in the mana heart? Instead of a heart, sea turtles move through the mana heart, like a dragon's foot. It circulates mana throughout the body and circulates blood through the mana heart. For them, the mana heart was no different from a human heart. It was as smooth and hard as a stone, but it was the most essential part like a human heart. A sea turtle of this size would have a huge mana heart. It would probably be bigger than a decent house. Kyog. Ooh, ooh, the path made by scattering the holy fire once was quickly closed. The number of monsters living in the ocean was close to infinity, and the inside of the sea turtle's body was already no different from a small ocean. The closed path had to be opened again. There was no way but a frontal breakthrough now. Scratch, whoops, pggggg. Yuan swung his sword without sparing mana. All sides were filled with monsters, and inside the sea turtle's body. Even his vision was dark, and he had no choice but to rely on his senses. Shish, pick, a line of blood splattered on Yuan's cheek. A thinly cut wound, he barely missed a blade that flew from somewhere. Shish, puck, then, Yuan's sword cut the body of a monster that was approaching. A monster that was cut in half without even screaming. Yuan checked the monster's body through Yuan. A monster with a mermaid-like upper and lower body, and sharp blades like bats in both hands. It was a gargoyle mermaid. The number is gradually increasing. The deeper he went inside, the number of monsters also increased. There was a limit to illuminating the vision and moving forward through Yuan. If the wounds gradually increased, he would eventually collapse. Let's change the method. Yuan's eyes turned black. Thanks to the expanded senses, it didn't get completely dark, but the vision that had been brightly lit became as dark as night. The surroundings turned pitch black. All that could be heard in it was the cries of the monsters. Next moment, sensory zone, Wog. Yuan felt the space around him, centered on him, coming under his feet. And right after that, Yuan remembered that gargoyle mermaids lived in groups. Chararara, SS's, SSSSSS. Several gargoyle mermaids, blades pierced Yuan's body and passed by. However, Kagagak, the blades of the gargoyle mermaids only clashed with each other, not cutting anything. Rather, it was the gargoyle mermaids who were cut. Quag, the bodies of the gargoyle mermaids were cut and divided into upper and lower bodies. Yuan, who had avoided the gargoyle mermaids, surprise attack and counterattacked at the same time, had his eyes closed. It's much more comfortable. I was making a wrong judgment. In the dark vision, he first thought of Yuan, a skill he had used for quite a long time since his regression. It's the most perfect skill that can restore lost vision. However, in this situation, sensory zone was much more suitable than Yuan. However, in this situation, sensory zone was much more suited than fire eyes. Since I'm focusing on my vision, fire eyes battle prediction will inevitably be weaker than usual. I might as well give up my vision at a time like this. Vision was the sense that humans relied on the most out of their 5 senses. However, once your sensory stats increased to a certain degree and you became accustomed to fighting, the number of senses you could use in battle would also increase. Sensory zone was a skill that maximized those senses. Right now, instead of closing his eyes, Yuan poured all the focus he would have used on his vision into his other senses. Swish, sniff, whoosh, boom, Yuan dodged between the monsters and cast holy fire. Using multiple skills at the same time drained his mana faster, but it also meant that he could advance much faster. Phew, his breathing gradually quickened. His stamina was rapidly depleting because he was constantly moving his body. The same went for his mana. Even though his stamina and mana recovery speed had increased due to the effects of night, his current situation was like a leaking bucket. It was like adding another person to bail out water. It wouldn't stop the water from leaking out of the broken bucket. How much longer can I fight? Yuan continued to advance while constantly checking his condition. Halfway there, it had already been over an hour since he had entered the sea turtle's body. During that time, he had fought while conserving his strength, but he had still used up about half of his mana. Still, it was fortunate. Thump, the sound wasn't far away. No, maybe it's not so fortunate. As the sound drew closer, the number of monsters increased. The energy he felt was reminiscent of an army of ants. This number was similar to the total number of monsters Yuan had faced up to this point. Is it protecting the mana heart or the sea god stone? Perhaps the sea turtle was also building its own defense system. Creak, Yuan, who had reached the location of the mana heart, stopped for the first time in an hour. The monsters, who had been charging at him like bulls just a moment ago, stopped moving. They were moving around something huge in the center. This wasn't a move to attack Yuan. It was a move to protect something. Thump. And that something in the center was, of course, the sea turtle's mana heart. Swish, Yuan's eyes, which had been tightly shut, opened. As he used fire eyes, his blurry vision brightened. Thump, 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 the mana heart was beating slowly but powerfully. A huge, bright red rock. That was the sea turtle's mana heart. Numerous monsters had already gathered around the mana heart, which was the size of a house. Growl, roar, swish. Thousands of monsters had gathered together as if they were having a festival. If they were any smaller, it would be believable to call it a bug's nest. I have to break through that. The sea god stone was definitely embedded in the mana heart. It was right in front of him now. Clang, Yuan tightened his grip on his sword. There was no reason to conserve his stamina or mana anymore. Crack, crackle, the power emanating from Quene grew stronger. There's only one thing I can do. Hephaestus had said that the blacksmith's stone was a perfect item on its own. That's why he had focused on one thing when he made Quene at Yuan's request. I made a medium that would draw out all the power this item has. That's all. The item Quene, which Hades originally used, was famous for its absolute concealment. That was because Hades' personality and fighting style were so secretive that he had asked for an ability related to that when Quene was being made. If my guess is correct, this is. Zap. A yellow eye opened on the back of Yuan's hand, where he was holding Quene. An item comparable to father's, lightning bolt. Summoning, hell.